Chapter 2775. Astronomical Transaction. Those two? Yu Luo was confused when she followed Feng's gaze. After all, there was nobody there. Even when she pushed her perception as a void realm expert to the limit, she still couldn't sense any aura or presence of a living being. She didn't notice any unusual fluctuations in space either. Experts at the void realm would be aware of even the slightest disturbances around them. At the end of the day, an assassin's stealth only turned them invisible to the naked eye. They remained physically present in the world. So long as they moved, no matter how slow, they would cause some air turbulence. Such unnatural changes wouldn't escape the perception of a void realm expert. Hence, even a void realm assassin generally couldn't get within 30 yards of other void realm experts undetected. Normally, they could operate only outside the 30-yard radius. As for assassins at the domain realm, while they could perform better, they still wouldn't be able to get within 20 yards of void realm experts undetected. And even if they did manage this feat, they would be able to maintain it for only a matter of seconds. However, the spot Feng was currently looking at was within 20 yards of himself. Moreover, the conversation between Feng and Lionheart had lasted more than a few seconds already. Even a domain realm expert wouldn't be able to stay hidden for so long. Upon hearing Feng's words, Lionheart was slightly surprised. Simultaneously, a hint of alertness and admiration appeared in his eyes. Amazing! As expected of a Tier 4 expert capable of moving between main cities. Part of the reason Lionheart had brought Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow with him this time was to test Feng's strength. Crimson Billow was ranked second in Skyflare in terms of stealth. Utilizing her advantages as a domain realm expert, she had created a unique concealment technique that allowed her to maintain a high degree of stealth despite being in motion. Meanwhile, after combining this technique with a potion that hid one's life aura, let alone Tier 3 domain realm experts, even Tier 4 domain realm experts wouldn't detect her even when she was within 20 yards of them. Of course, Tier 4 domain realm experts would definitely detect her once she got within 16 yards of them. Even so, being able to conceal herself to such an extent was already more than enough for her to rank at the top of Meteorite City and instill fear into Tier 4 experts. Wind Chaser was even more powerful. After reaching Tier 4, his stealth skill was no longer limited to just turning his physical body invisible and concealing his life aura. Instead, the skill would place his body in a shadow space. No matter what he did inside this space, it wouldn't affect the outside world. Naturally, others wouldn't be able to detect his movements while he was inside this shadow space. In fact, despite knowing about Wind Chaser's ability, Lionheart hadn't realized that Wind Chaser was already standing within 20 yards of him. Nevertheless, Feng had stated that there were two people behind Lionheart. This meant that he had detected both Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser. "Chaser, Billow, you two can show yourselves now," Lionheart said, smiling as he looked at the empty space Feng indicated. "No need to hide anymore." As soon as Lionheart finished speaking, two figures gradually appeared in that empty space. They were none other than Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow. The two assassins were looking at Feng with eyes brimming with surprise and confusion. "Commander, did I show some irregularities just now?" Crimson Billow quietly asked Lionheart through the team chat. Afraid that she would get detected, she had deliberately maintained a 21-yard distance between herself and Feng. After all, she hardly knew anything about Feng, apart from the fact that he was a Tier 4 expert, and she didn't wish to ruin Lionheart's attempt at probing Feng's strength. Yet, despite the 21-yard distance, he still detected her. Excluding Lionheart, this was the first time a Tier 4 individual perceived her from beyond 20 yards. "You didn't. It's just that this person is much stronger than we thought," Lionheart responded, shaking his head. "Don't act rashly against him afterward." Feng had discovered not only Crimson Billow but also Wind Chaser. While defeating a Tier 4 expert like Feng would be simple for the current Skyflare, killing him would be incredibly difficult. Unless absolutely necessary, they had best not offend the Sword Emperor. In response, both Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser nodded silently. The trio had conversed for only 2 or 3 seconds, so outsiders did not find anything wrong with the situation. They merely saw Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow approaching Lionheart slowly after making their appearance. When Yu Luo, who stood beside Feng, saw the two assassins walking over, her eyes widened in shock. There really are two people. Despite the two assassins being so close to her, she actually failed to notice either of them. This overturned her understanding of the assassin class. Meanwhile, when Feng saw the two assassins, a hint of wariness also appeared in his eyes. The two assassins were astonishingly strong. This was especially true for Wind Chaser. If not for the recent breakthrough Feng achieved with his mana body, which granted him a physique and perception far superior to ordinary Tier 4 individuals, he would have most likely failed to notice Wind Chaser's presence. If Wind Chaser really were intent on targeting a specific player, it would be a nightmare for the set player. After all, the Tier 4 assassin was capable of suddenly appearing within 20 yards of his target without giving off any indications a distance that any Tier 4 combatant could cross in the blink of an eye. If Feng was not careful, even he might end up falling prey to Wind Chaser's ambush. Let's head to a reception room to continue our conversation, Lionheart suggested to Feng. Sure. Feng did not object to the proposal. His original goal in coming to the ancient god's domain was to acquire a large amount of resources. Meanwhile, the best way to do so was by partnering with a local tyrant. He could gather resources much faster this way than if he did it by himself. In fact, he could even gain access to items that normally wouldn't appear on the market. Lionheart's taking the initiative to seek him out was naturally good news for Feng. Lionheart led Feng and Yu Luo to the top-floor reception room he had reserved beforehand. Commander Lionheart. After taking his seat, Feng went straight to the point, saying, "Please just say what you have to say. There is no need for us to waste both our time by playing around with words." "You really are a straightforward person, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart smiled at Feng's words. "I was thinking the same thing. In that case, I'll be blunt with you. Skyflare wishes to purchase all of the crystals of souls and soul water you are selling." "It seems you are very ambitious, Commander Lionheart. You actually plan to monopolize Meteorite City?" Feng didn't feel particularly surprised at Lionheart's declaration. Calmly, he said, "Of course we can go with such an arrangement as well. Only, I have quite a number of these items and I'm afraid your adventurer team can't swallow them all." As soon as Feng finished speaking, Wind Chaser, who stood behind Lionheart, laughed. "What a joke. There is nothing in Meteorite City that our adventurer team cannot swallow." Looking at Feng, Wind Chaser sneered, "Of course that is under the premise that your price is fair." At Wind Chaser's provocation, Feng simply shook his head and smiled. "Truthfully, even at 150,000 magic crystals per crystal of souls, you won't be able to afford everything. Not to mention there is still the soul water." He had a total of 43 crystals of souls. If he sold each for 150,000 magic crystals, that would equate to 6.45 million magic crystals. Even though the ancient god's domain was rich in resources, a player force with a sphere of activity limited to just one city couldn't take out such an amount. At Feng's words, Wind Chaser, who initially planned to probe Feng further, fell silent. There was no way a Tier 4 expert like Feng wouldn't know about the Skyflare adventurer team's status and general wealth in Meteorite City. For Feng to say such words meant he had absolute confidence backing him. Meanwhile, after hearing Feng's response, both Yu Luo and Crimson Billow couldn't help gasping. They never thought that Feng would actually be so wealthy. They had already investigated the Crystal of Souls, so they knew it was a precious treasure that wasn't obtained easily. Yet Feng had just declared that Skyflare couldn't afford to purchase all his stock. This proved that Feng had a lot of crystals of souls on hand. Who knew how many Tier 4 experts one could create with so many crystals of souls? "You truly are extraordinary, Brother Black Flame." Lionheart immediately broke into a smile. Moreover, this was a very sincere smile. "I apologize to you on behalf of my brother. At the same time, I also hope that the Skyflare adventurer team can form a long-term partnership with you. What do you think? I admit that Skyflare cannot take out the necessary magic crystals to purchase all your crystals of souls. However, our adventurer team still ranks within the top 3 of Meteorite City's player forces in daily income. We might not be able to swallow everything in one bite, but I'm sure we can do so after several or a dozen bites. Furthermore, I can assure you that not only will we purchase each crystal of souls for 200,000 magic crystals, but we will also ensure a weekly transaction of 3 million magic crystals at a minimum. May I know what you think of this, Brother Black Flame?" Yu Luo gaped in shock at Lionheart's words despite herself. She never imagined that the Skyflare adventurer team had such astonishing wealth. Even the superpowers in the modern god's domain were far from comparable to Skyflare in magic crystal acquisition. Moreover, Lionheart even raised the price of the Crystal of Souls to 200,000 magic crystals. Skyflare was probably the only power in Meteorite City capable of offering such a price. After all, a piece of fragmented legendary equipment cost only around 500,000 magic crystals, while fragmented legendary weapons cost around 1 million magic crystals. Lionheart's promise of a weekly transaction of 3 million magic crystals meant Skyflare was trading away 3 fragmented legendary weapons every week. Commander. At this time, even Wind Chaser was stunned by Lionheart's offer. The Skyflare adventurer team operated only in Meteorite City's vicinity, and there were only so many resources available in the area. If Skyflare really pushed through with this transaction, the adventurer team would have to tighten its belt and strictly limit its future expenditures. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Okay, I can agree to those conditions, Feng said, nodding. After giving the matter some thought, he felt that this price was probably the best he could get for the Crystals of Souls. Even if he could get a higher price at an auction, it wouldn't be much higher. However, before this, I wish to test you, Commander Lionheart. We can verify our transaction depending on your performance. What do you think? Test our commander? Feng's words infuriated Wind Chaser. Crimson Billow's complexion also darkened, a hint of hostility appearing in her eyes as she looked at Feng. Even super guilds would not dare say that they wished to test their commander's qualifications for cooperation, yet a person of unknown origin actually did so. Feng was utterly looking down on the Skyflare adventurer team. However, before Wind Chaser or Crimson Billow could say anything else, Lionheart extended a hand to stop them. He then looked at Feng with a glint of determination in his eyes as he asked, "May I know how you wish to conduct your test, Brother Black Flame?" "Simple. So long as you survive a hit from me, you'll pass," Feng said decisively. Chapter 2776, Duel Between Sword and Shield. Survive a hit from you? Lionheart was momentarily stunned by Feng's words. Even Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow fell into a daze for a long time. They felt that Feng was simply toying with the Skyflare adventurer team. Looking at Feng, Wind Chaser asked to verify, "Are you sure this is your condition? Do you know what title our commander holds in Meteorite City?" Initially, Wind Chaser thought that Feng would make things difficult for them to invalidate this transaction. Yet Feng's condition for partnership was simply for Lionheart to survive a hit from him. This test was beyond simple. Let alone Tier 4 players, even superior mythic monsters were incapable of one-shotting Lionheart. The Skyflare adventurer team had relied precisely on Lionheart's overwhelming defense to develop to its current extent. It would be a complete and utter joke to say that a Tier 4 player could one-shot Lionheart. For a moment, Wind Chaser even suspected that Feng had never bothered looking into Lionheart's information. Either that or the man thought that Lionheart's fame was exaggerated. "Of course. I'm very certain." Feng nodded earnestly. Yuluo also couldn't help looking at Feng strangely. She simply couldn't understand why Feng would set such a meaningless condition. She knew that Feng was indeed very strong. This was evident from how he repelled over a dozen Tier 3 demon leaders with one move. However, Lionheart wasn't a pushover either. The achievements he had today were piled up through innumerable battles. Wind Chaser and Crimson Billow turned to Lionheart. Although they didn't know what Lionheart thought of this matter, Feng's test presented no problem to them. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to call it a free pass. Meanwhile, so long as their two sides entered into a partnership, the Skyflare adventurer team would be able to gain full control over Meteorite City easily. In fact, it wouldn't be long before they could start establishing branches in other NPC main cities. And even if the player forces of the other cities opposed Skyflare's intrusion, they would have difficulty doing so. After all, what truly mattered in a fight between powers were Tier 4 combatants. Although the saying one Tier 4 player could easily go up against a countless number of Tier 3 players was indeed exaggerated, it was still a fact that Tier 4 players could do many things that Tier 3 players couldn't. This was the difference between tiers and life ratings. "No problem. I agree to your condition," Lionheart said. After giving the matter some thought, he couldn't find any problems with Feng's condition. "However, are we going to hold the test here?" In Lionheart's opinion, Feng probably wasn't aware of the strength of his Blood Knight class. As one of the incredibly rare ancient legacies in God's domain, the skills it offered were far superior to ordinary peak legacies. Not to mention he currently had 3 fragmented legendary items on him: the Bulwark of Holy Blood, the Void Magic Armor, and the Windwall Ring. Even when he had only the fragmented legendary shield and armor, he could already fend off superior mythic monsters. In fact, if not for the high HP and defense of superior mythic monsters, he could even solo these monsters given enough time. Now that he had the Windwall Ring, his defensive capabilities had soared even further. I'm afraid this place isn't sufficient. We'll need to rent an advanced combat room, Feng said, shaking his head. In that case, let's go to our adventurer team's Skyflare hotel. There's a special combat room there. It should be enough for us to display our strengths, Lionheart suggested. A special combat room? Feng was surprised at Lionheart's words. He never thought that special combat rooms already existed in the ancient god's domain. Special combat rooms were far superior to advanced combat rooms. They were perfect for practicing skill and spell usage. However, special combat rooms simply weren't something that could be acquired at this stage of the game. Let's go to the Skyflare Hotel then. Feng and Yu Luo followed Lionheart's group to the Skyflare Hotel, which was only 1 block away from the auction house. The instant the group walked into the Skyflare Hotel, Yu Luo grew a little excited. The Skyflare Hotel wasn't a place just anyone could enter and rest at. Aside from Skyflare's members and the members of Partnered Powers, who received a 50% discount, visitors would be charged the full price when staying at the hotel. Meanwhile, even the most basic room here cost 400 magic crystals per day. Even a Tier 3 Void Realm expert like herself wouldn't dare stay here for no good reason. Only when she needed to verify some theories and techniques she thought of would she make an exception and stay here. As for Feng, he felt as if he had just walked into a sacred training ground. The density of the mana here was truly amazing, much more than even in Stone Forest City's Freedom Hotel. In fact, the boost he got for his perception of magic elements was roughly 20% higher than what he got from the hotel he was currently staying at. No wonder he's so confident of being able to take out 3 million magic crystals per week. At this time, Feng finally understood why Lionheart was so confident in the Skyflare Adventurer team's abilities. Meanwhile, along with Feng and Yu Luo's arrival, an uproar occurred among Skyflare's executives. I heard that guy named Black Flame wants to test the commander. What? That guy must be crazy. He thinks the commander is someone he can test? Even if the commander just stands there and does nothing, he won't be able to injure the commander in the slightest. It's not a standard PvP though. He only wants the commander to take a hit from him. It seems this person is trying to show his strength to our adventurer team. He must be worried that he can't beat the commander, so he came up with that kind of condition. At that time, even if he fails to injure the commander, he could still salvage his reputation somewhat. When Skyflare's several dozen executives looked at Feng, who had already entered the special combat room, they promptly conducted hushed discussions among themselves. They all felt that Feng was pulling such a stunt because he wished to gain respect yet was also worried about making a fool of himself. However, in their opinion, Feng's actions were pointless. After all, when Lionheart dueled against other players, he almost never used his full strength to achieve victory. Even Wind Chaser, who had reached Tier 4 as well, had been almost helpless against Meteorite's wall. And although Wind Chaser had eventually emerged victorious in his duel against Lionheart, he had done so by dragging out the fight and chipping away at Lionheart's HP. Not to mention, this was in a situation where Lionheart had not gone all out. Otherwise, even Wind Chaser shouldn't think of harming Lionheart in the slightest. Shortly afterward, all of Skyflare's executives packed the special combat room's spectator stands. Some executives had even abandoned their quests to spectate this duel. Lionheart had never fought in a duel since Wind Chaser had gotten promoted to Tier 4. During this period, Lionheart had improved significantly. Not only did he gain a new Tier 4 legacy skill, but he had also obtained the fragmented legendary ranked Windwall Ring, a defense-oriented ring. At this point, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that their commander's strength had already surpassed their imagination. While Skyflare's executives were eagerly waiting for the duel to begin, Feng and Lionheart were standing in the middle of the room's spacious battlefield. At this point, both fighters had already adjusted their conditions and were ready to take action at any time. I'm ready. You can make your move whenever you want, Lionheart said as he raised his shield and long sword. From the crimson runes decorating the shield and long sword, it was evident the two were a set. Only, the mana gathered around the weapon was slightly inferior in quality compared to what was around the bulwark of the Holy Blood. At this time Lionheart stopped concealing his statistics. Immediately his HP of 16.6 million appeared for everyone to see, flaunting the high HP of a Tier 4 defensive class. It was evident that Lionheart planned to let Feng see his own strength. He has 16.6 million HP. How is this possible? Luo gasped reflexively when she saw Lionheart's HP. As a defensive class player, Lionheart already possessed incredibly high defense to begin with. Combined with his various defensive skills and HP, he was practically a boss monster. Luo even doubted that Feng could one-shot Lionheart even if the latter did not defend himself. In fact, it would already be a miracle if Feng could remove 1/3 of Lionheart's HP in one hit. Amazing. Level 130 Tier 3 defensive classes usually have only 9 million HP on average, yet you have almost twice that, Feng said in admiration. It's nothing. It's only because of my unique legacy. Lionheart didn't pay particular attention to Feng's words of appreciation. On the contrary, he wanted to use this opportunity to let Feng realize the Skyflare adventurer team's might. After all, Skyflare had already lost once to Feng before. He needed to reclaim this loss and level the playing field. Since you're ready, I'll begin. Feng naturally understood what was going through Lionheart's mind. Unfortunately, Lionheart simply wasn't aware of Feng's aim. Come. Lionheart readied his shield, a serious expression appearing on his face. Immediately afterward, not only did Lionheart's aura skyrocket in intensity, but a faint blood-red barrier had also appeared around his body. Crap. The commander is getting serious. He's actually going all out and fully exerting his mana body right off the bat. One of Skyflare's vice commanders, a robust level 132 shield warrior, said in astonishment. Blood armor. This was the Tier 4 legacy skill Lionheart obtained after achieving a 100% completion rate with his mana body. Although the magic barrier appeared flimsy, it could absorb up to 5 million damage. Moreover, the barrier would replenish itself once every 40 seconds. In other words, if one failed to cause over 5 million damage to Lionheart within 40 seconds, one had no chance of slaying him. Had Lionheart used this move during his duel with Windchaser back then, Windchaser wouldn't have been able to harm him at all. However, before Skyflare's members were done admiring their commander's Tier 4 passive skill, they saw Feng unsheath the abyssal blade. Immediately afterward, everyone clearly sensed the mana in the room trembling and freezing momentarily. Before anyone could react to the unexpected development, Feng raised the abyssal blade with both hands and looked at Lionheart. The mana inside the special combat room then began to boil, the phenomenon causing everyone present to shudder involuntarily. Afterward, everyone felt a wave of scorching heat wash over their body. How is this possible? When Windchaser sensed the mana around him boiling, he was stunned. After all, the space inside the special combat room was massive, with a 1,000-yard radius. That was more than enough for 2 Tier 4 players to fight to their heart's content. Nevertheless, Feng caused all of the mana inside the combat room to boil just by entering a stance. This kind of thing was simply unheard of. At this time, Lionheart's gaze also changed. If entering a stance was enough to trigger such a phenomenon, Feng's strength was definitely far more extraordinary than he initially thought. However, before Lionheart could take any further action, the flow of time inside the combat room seemed to slow down. The only thing capable of moving was apparently the sword in Feng's hands. Second sword Holy Devour. As the long sword descended, an overwhelming pressure fell upon the room. Afterward, space within the room ignited as if it couldn't withstand the terrifying and violent pressure. The resulting flames threatened to burn everything in the room into nothing. Not good. Holy Blood Wall. For Saint's Descent. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Upon seeing the boundless flames approaching him, Lionheart hurriedly activated the defensive skill Holy Blood Wall, then stabbed his shield into the ground and activated his strongest Tier 4 defensive legacy skill. The next moment, a twofold magic array appeared before the bulwark of Holy Blood, which was followed by an illusory crimson shield that was over a dozen meters tall. Crimson runes flared all over Lionheart's body, solidifying the surrounding space until it was as sturdy as a steel wall. Meanwhile, the instant Lionheart used Four Saints' Descent, the endless sea of flames devoured him like a giant beast. Boom! Accompanied by a thunderous explosion, the space within the special combat room transformed into a dark, empty void. Chapter 2777, Shocking Skyflare. A dark void enveloped the battlefield. Let alone Tier 3 players, even Tier 4 players couldn't survive in this space. Meanwhile, when Skyflare's executives seated in the spectator stands saw this scene, they were dumbfounded. How can one / carry such destructive power? Even those Tier 4 NPCs aren't capable of exhibiting such power. Is he really just a Tier 4 player? He has such terrifying strength, yet we actually failed to find any information on him. Just who is he? After a moment of silence, Skyflare's executives began a heated discussion among themselves as they goggled at the battlefield's shattered space. At this time they no longer underestimated Feng in the slightest. Now only shock and fear filled their hearts. With such terrifying combat power, Feng was no longer an opponent vulnerable to Zerg tactics. Only powerful Tier 4 NPCs could match him. He was actually so strong. Tissu Luo's eyes were also wide with disbelief as she looked at the shattered space. Even Angelica Teresa's strongest attack would fall short of Feng's from what she could tell. Angelica Teresa was a peak-rank Tier 4 existence and one of the top 5 powerhouses of Meteorite City. In addition, as an NPC, the items and basic attributes she possessed were also far superior to players. Yet Feng had actually executed an attack way stronger than even Angelica Teresa's strongest attack. Commander. The commander couldn't have fallen, right? After a while, Wind Chaser and the others snapped out of their daze and searched hurriedly for Lionheart's figure in the dark void. Out of the player attacks they had seen thus far, Feng's was undoubtedly the strongest. Even Tier 4 NPCs were unlikely to be capable of executing such an attack. Hence, although they knew that Lionheart possessed a heaven-defying defense, they couldn't help doubting his ability to survive Feng's attack. After everyone had searched for some time, the shattered space gradually recovered. 2 vague figures appeared, standing in the recovering space, with one of them looking incredibly miserable. This is great. The commander is still alive. I knew the commander could withstand it. He is Meteorite's wall after all. There's no way he can be one-shot by a player. When Skyflare's members saw Lionheart's figure, they immediately grew excited. However, unlike his colleagues, Lionheart did not feel happy or excited at all. Instead, his heart pounded with fear and relief. That was too close. If not for the Windwall ring, I would have definitely been one-shot. Lionheart smiled bitterly when he looked at his remaining HP. Currently he had less than 6 million HP remaining. While this might seem like a lot, he had only managed to retain this amount of HP thanks to the Windwall ring's passive skill. The Windwall ring's passive skill, Wind's Protection, was capable of reducing all the damage he received by 35%. Even if he received a Tier 5 attack, its damage would still be reduced by a full 35%. Wind's Protection was also the Windwall ring's only skill. The Windwall ring was different from other equipment with passive damage reduction skills. Although the alternatives might even have skills offering much greater reductions than Wind's Protection on paper, there were hidden limits to these skills. Generally, their upper limit was Tier 4. Once an attack reached the Tier 4 standard, their effect would be significantly weaker. And against Tier 5 attacks, their effect was practically negligible. However, that was not the case for the Windwall ring's Wind's Protection. The skill's description clearly stated that it could reduce the damage of even Tier 5 attacks by 35% and not 1% less. On the other side, after Feng executed Holy Devour, his complexion had paled significantly. Is it still too much to execute this move? When Feng sensed that more than half of his concentration had disappeared, he was shocked. He had already developed his epic mana body to 110% completion rate, yet he still had trouble gathering and condensing the mana required to execute Holy Devour. For a moment he couldn't help imagining what kind of power he could exhibit if he successfully executed the third sword, Holy Annihilation. Tier 5? Tier 6? Regardless, this is a good result. At the very least I can now use the complete Holy Devour. Now I should be able to cope even against a half-step Demon King. As Feng sheathed the abyssal blade, he was satisfied with his previous attack. Although his mana had undergone a qualitative transformation, thanks to the improvement of his mana body, the improvement this change brought to his skills and spells was limited. It wasn't enough for them to undergo a qualitative transformation. However, it was a different story for mana techniques whose power was highly dependent on the quality of the mana used. Now if he went all out, he could execute an attack at the Tier 5 standard. The only drawback of Holy Devour was the huge burden it placed on his concentration. Even at peak condition, he could execute the complete Holy Devour only once. Nevertheless, it was already more than enough as a trump card. As Feng was savoring the experience of executing Holy Devour, Lionheart approached him. "Brother Blackflame, that move of yours really is ruthless. If I hadn't gained some improvements recently, I would have really died," Lionheart said jocularly. At this moment, Lionheart no longer underestimated or looked at Feng with contempt. Only respect was present in his eyes. The fact that Feng had managed to execute such a move as a player meant that he already stood at the apex of the entire God's domain. Just this point alone was already more than enough to earn him everyone's respect. In God's domain, strength was everything. It was also something that could not be faked. For Feng to have developed himself to this extent, he must have experienced countless trials and hardships. "You're too humble, Commander Lionheart. The fact that you managed to block my attack is all due to your own ability, not luck." Looking at Lionheart, Feng added, "Now that our one-hit agreement is complete, according to our previous arrangement, I will supply the crystals of souls and soul water to only the Skyflare adventurer team for Meteorite City's side. Thank you. As for the matter of magic crystals, please rest assured. The Skyflare adventurer team definitely won't let you down, Brother Blackflame." Lionheart couldn't help feeling a little happy at Feng's words. With Feng willing to partner with Skyflare, Skyflare would be able to take full control of Meteorite City easily. "Next, let's talk about the specifics of our transaction." Going straight to the point, Feng said, "Like I said before, so long as you manage to withstand one hit from me, I will agree to partner with you, Commander Lionheart. However, after we start our cooperation, I'll need your help with something. Of course, I won't have you help me for nothing. In exchange, I'll sell the crystals of souls at 150,000 magic crystals each to Skyflare. How about it? 150,000 each?" Lionheart was slightly tempted. "May I know what you need help with?" Previously, when he offered to purchase the crystals of souls at 200,000 magic crystals each, the price was actually a little too high for Skyflare to bear. However, the crystals of souls were far too important. They would also play a crucial role when Skyflare attempted to conquer other main cities. Hence he had gone through with the price. Lowering the price to 150,000 magic crystals each would definitely alleviate a lot of Skyflare's burden. "Help me kill a boss," Feng said, smiling. The reason Feng wanted to test Lionheart wasn't just to experiment with the power of his upgraded mana body. He had also wished to see whether Lionheart could withstand the attack of a Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, if he didn't have anyone capable of tanking a hit from a Tier 4 infant dragon, slaying it would be utterly impossible. Since Lionheart clearly met this requirement, combined with the effects of the heavenly dragon's breath, challenging an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon was entirely feasible. Kill a boss. Lionheart was a little puzzled. He never thought Feng's request would be so simple. "Is this boss very strong?" "Very strong." Not bothering to hide the truth, Feng said, "It's a Tier 4 infant dragon." "A Tier 4 infant dragon?" Lionheart gasped at Feng's words. Immediately, he thought of something and asked, "Are you referring to the one Lady Angelica is trying to challenge?" "That's right. It's that one." Feng nodded. "Actually, this matter is also beneficial to you as well, Commander Lionheart. After all, Meteorite City's promotion will attract more players and resources to the city. At that time, Skyflare can grow stronger together with the city." Lionheart nodded in agreement. In reality, he too wished for Meteorite City to grow stronger and become an advanced main city. However, the incredibly high difficulty of challenging a Tier 4 infant dragon made him decide to have Skyflare opt out of Angelica Teresa's expedition. After all, Skyflare already had 2 Tier 4 players under its command, and it had yet to stabilize its advantages. If Skyflare eagerly participated in the risky expedition and failed, the adventurer team would definitely lose a lot of its advantages. What do you think, Commander Lionheart? Feng asked. Previously, he didn't hold much hope for slaying the Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, a Tier 4 infant dragon was comparable to Tier 5 existences. It was much stronger than even a demon prince. Even though he could use the complete Holy Devour now, it wouldn't make any difference since he couldn't use the technique indefinitely. However, the story would change if Lionheart was present. The fact that Lionheart could survive a Tier 5 attack meant that he could defend against a Tier 4 infant dragon's attack. Okay. After thinking for a while, Lionheart gritted his teeth and agreed to Feng's condition. However, Brother Black Flame, as Skyflare has just gained some advantages, we cannot afford to invest everything into helping you. We can send only a 100-man team at most. In response to Lionheart's worries, Feng simply chuckled and said, "That's already more than enough. In fact, it's fine so long as Skyflare can dispatch its 2 Tier 4 players, let alone a 100-man team." "May I know when we will begin the operation?" Lionheart asked. Raiding a Tier 4 infant dragon was an important matter. Preparing the necessary manpower and supplies would take a lot of time. "We're not in a rush right now. I'm afraid it will still take several days before we can set out," Feng said, shaking his head. "I'll notify you when the time comes, Commander Lionheart." Challenging a Tier 4 infant dragon with just 3 Tier 4 players would be outright suicide. It wouldn't matter even if they had a large number of Tier 3 players supporting them. Fortunately, the ancient god's domain did not require players to search for their legacy lands to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests. So long as he had Lifeless Thorn and the others challenged their promotion quests and some of them succeeded, he would have a much greater chance of success. "Alright. If that's the case, I can make more preparations on my side." Lionheart breathed out a sigh of relief at Feng's words. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Afterward, Feng signed a partnership contract with Lionheart to the effect that Skyflare would purchase crystals of souls from Feng at 150,000 magic crystals per crystal and soul water at 30,000 magic crystals per drop. For the first transaction, Skyflare purchased a total of 20 crystals of souls and 50 drops of soul water, the total expenditure amounting to 4.5 million magic crystals. When it came to magic crystals, Skyflare was wealthier than most superpowers operating in the modern god's domain. When the transaction was completed, Feng couldn't help his elation. After all, he now had the 8 million magic crystals required to construct the small mobile fortress. Afterward, all he needed to do was collect 2 million pieces of mana ore and 30,000 mana stones. In addition, he also had a chance to raid the Tier 4 infant dragon. Leaving the Skyflare Hotel, Feng looked at the additional 4.5 million magic crystals in his bag and smiled. "Now that I have the money, it's about time to have Lifeless Thorn and the others undergo their promotion." Chapter 2778, Semi-Finished Mana Body Meteorite City, Silver Hotel. After Feng received 4.5 million magic crystals from Skyflare, he returned to the Silver Hotel with Luo. As for the small auction he initially planned to hold, Lionheart had announced to the public that Skyflare would monopolize all of the products. Hence, the commotion over the auction died down quickly. None of Meteorite City's various powers dared to voice their opinions on Skyflare's monopoly. After all, Skyflare was the sole power in the city with 2 Tier 4 combatants under its command. Previously, the powers with Tier 4 combatants still dared to stand up against Skyflare because Lionheart could not easily kill other Tier 4 combatants by himself. However, now that Skyflare's Wind Chaser was a Tier 4 assassin, it would be a piece of cake for Skyflare to kill any individual Tier 4 combatant. Hence, even the other 2 of the top 3 player forces in Meteorite City decided to tolerate the situation. Not to mention, while the Crystal of Souls could indeed strengthen an individual's soul, the amount of help this improvement could provide in the Tier 4 promotion quest was minuscule. Even if Skyflare obtained all 5 Crystals of Souls, the adventurer team would, at most, increase the number of Tier 4 combatants it had from 2 to 3. Meanwhile, back in his room, Feng promptly took out 75,000 magic crystals and distributed them to Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Xianxia, Cleansing Whistle and Luo. "Right, each of you take a drop of soul water as well," Feng said as he took out 5 drops of soul water and distributed them. "Once you are done collecting the legacy fragments, drink it immediately. Although it isn't as effective as the Crystal of Souls, it can still clear your mind. You should have an easier time learning your legacy skill." In response, Lifeless Thorn and the other Azura members nodded and accepted the soul water. Luo, however, hesitated. She didn't know whether she should accept the soul water, which cost 30,000 magic crystals a drop. Guild leader Black Flame, this soul water is too valuable. I already feel very indebted to you just for letting me challenge my Tier 4 promotion quest this time. I really cannot accept this soul water, Luo said, rejecting Feng's gift after giving the matter some thought. Heaven's Blade had cooperated with Zero Wing only once. The two organizations couldn't even be considered allies. If she accepted this soul water, she would owe Feng a huge favor. In that case, she would have a difficult time explaining herself to Zwei once she returned. However, in response to Luo's rejection, Feng shook his head and said, Miss Luo, you must have misunderstood me. I'm not giving you this soul water for free. I need you to help me with something in the near future. If you reach Tier 4, we'll have a higher chance of success. Help you with something? Luo was a little dazed. That's right. I plan to raid that Tier 4 infant dragon. However, Tier 3 players are useless against an infant dragon. Only Tier 4 players will matter. Meanwhile, as you've reached the Void Realm already, your control over mana should be excellent. Your concentration should also be only one step away from reaching the Tier 4 standard. With the Soul Water's help, you'll have a better chance of promoting to Tier 4, Feng said, nodding. Hence, this Soul Water is my investment in you. I'm not giving it to you for free, so you don't need to overthink things. The upcoming raid of the Tier 4 infant dragon wasn't something Tier 3 players could stick their hands into. Only Tier 4 players could be of help. A Tier 4 healer would be especially useful. Since Feng couldn't guarantee that Xianxia would succeed in her Tier 4 promotion quest, having a backup plan would naturally be better. Not to mention he currently had over 2,000 drops of soul water on hand. He could still afford such a small investment. I understand. If I don't get promoted to Tier 4 this time, I will find a way to pay you back for this soul water, Luo said. With Feng's words, the burden she felt lightened considerably. Truthfully, she would be lying if she said that she did not want the soul water. After all, the Tier 4 promotion quest was no walk in the park. Meteorite City's peak experts demonstrated this point quite well. Among all the peak experts who had challenged their Tier 4 promotion quest, less than 10% succeeded. Not to mention she was slightly weaker than them. However, if she had the soul water's mind-cleansing effect, she would most likely be able to stand on equal footing with the local peak experts. Luo accepted the soul water, a glint of determination appearing in her eyes. This was because this drop of soul water represented not just hope but also a burden. If she completed her Tier 4 promotion quest, then she would be able to repay all of the favors she owed right away. After all, Tier 4 Great Clerics were incredibly rare even in the ancient gods' domain, let alone the modern gods' domain. You guys can go now. Whether you can get promoted or not will all depend on yourselves now, Feng said after Luo accepted the soul water. He then instructed the group of 5. Remember, act according to your strengths when choosing your respective Tier 4 skills. There is no need to learn the strongest one. Instead, learn the one you're most proficient at. He did not doubt the ability of the 5 people before him to collect the necessary number of legacy fragments. His only worry was their ability to learn a Tier 4 legacy skill within the allotted time. Afterward, under Luo's lead, Lifeless Thorn and the others departed for Meteorite City's Tier 4 instructors. Now, only Feng remained inside the hotel room. Let's hope a few of them can reach Tier 4. If that's the case, we'll have an easier time dealing with that infant dragon. Looking at the group of 5's departing figures, Feng inwardly celebrated the fact that he managed to get through his Tier 4 promotion quest previously. Immediately afterward, he sensed the state of his mana body and smiled. It's about time I grinded for some levels. If I don't get used to this mana body, I might cause the quest to fail. After unlocking his mana body to a 110% completion rate, he had not had an opportunity to get used to it properly. His duel with Lionheart didn't prove anything. After all, mana bodies provided all-around improvements to players. There was no way he could determine all of these improvements just by putting all his strength into one attack. In fact, he couldn't even tell if his overall combat power had improved or not through his duel with Lionheart. This was because the mana body's improvement mainly led to subtle improvements in various aspects. On the surface, it was impossible to tell if his improved mana body had brought any changes to his overall combat power. After all, his basic attributes remained the same as before. Right now, the only obvious improvements were in the density of his mana, his control over mana, his physique and his five senses. During his fight with Lionheart, he had only proven that the improvement of his mana body had positive effects on his mana techniques. Even then, he still wasn't clear how the improvement had triggered such a change. Needless to say, he was even more clueless about the other benefits his improved mana body had to offer. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If he wished to fully utilize his new mana body and maximize his combat power, he would need to readapt to his mana body. It was akin to learning a new skill or spell. He would need to put in a lot of time and effort into adapting and training. Only after he could make use of his mana body at an instinctive level could he be considered to have truly adapted to it. At this point, his mana body could only be considered a semi-finished product. Next, he would have to explore his mana body thoroughly. Feng drank a drop of soul water, recovering some of the concentration he had expended executing Holy Devour. He then put on his black cloak and silently departed from Meteorite City. After taking a look at the system map, he took to the skies and made his way toward the anti-magic volcano, a level 135 neutral map located a distance from Meteorite City. From start to end, nobody in Meteorite City was aware that he had left the city. Chapter 2779. Astonishing improvements. According to Feng's understanding, few players and NPCs from Meteorite City and other nearby cities were willing to come to the anti-magic volcano to grind and explore. Several factors contributed to this situation. Firstly, the thin mana environment here prevented players and NPCs from exhibiting the power of their skills and spells to their fullest extent. This, in turn, would put players and NPCs at a severe disadvantage against monsters. Secondly, what little mana there was in the anti-magic volcano was incredibly chaotic, which made it nigh impossible to control. Hence, doing combat here would not allow one to improve their control over mana. Thirdly, and most importantly, the monsters inhabiting the anti-magic volcano consisted solely of fire-type elemental creatures and beasts. These monsters had a combat power a lot higher than the average monsters. In addition, they existed in large numbers in the anti-magic volcano. Even a 1,000-man team of Tier 3 players would have difficulty staying alive in this map, let alone grinding for EXP. However, unlike other players, Feng considered this neutral map the perfect leveling spot for him. This place really is amazing. There are actually so many great lords and grand lords here. As Feng looked down at the wandering monsters while hovering in midair, he couldn't help a little excitement. With this, I won't have to worry about not having enough crystals of souls. Volcanic Behemoth. Demonic Beast, Grand Lord. Level 139 HP 3,600,000,000. Infernal Warlord. Elemental Creature, Great Lord. Level 137 HP 1,320,000,000. Infernal Chieftain. Elemental Creature, Grand Lord. HP 3,100,000,000. Feng had to admit that the anti-magic volcano was a sight to behold. This neutral map teemed with Great Lord-ranked monsters. Moreover, they moved in large groups of 100 or more closely positioned to each other. If one made too much of a commotion when fighting a group of monsters here, one would easily attract monsters from other areas. However, despite the high difficulty of this map, it was the perfect grinding spot for Tier 4 existences, specifically Tier 4 experts with a mana domain. Feng charged at the volcanic behemoth, the strongest monster in sight, without hesitation. The next moment, when Feng got within 300 yards of the volcanic behemoth, the Grand Lord in question noticed his presence. Immediately, the 30-meter-tall beast covered in flaming scales let loose a deafening roar. The roar instantly attracted the wandering and resting volcanic beasts, and over 3,000 volcanic beasts converged on the volcanic behemoth's location in the blink of an eye. The majority of these volcanic beasts were level 135+ lords, with some of them great lords. Even a 1,000-man team composed of Tier 3 experts of the same level would falter when faced with so many volcanic beasts. After all, not only were these monsters moving in an organized manner, but the mana their bodies radiated also showed faint signs of synchronizing, which would double the power of the fire-type spells they cast. Suddenly, thousands of fiery attacks shot into the air heading toward Feng. Although the attacks were not fully synchronized with each other, the sheer number still allowed them to exhibit power at the Tier 4 standard. That was more than enough to deter any ordinary Tier 4 combatant from tanking the attacks. Come. However, when Feng saw the several thousand attacks coming at him, not only did he not show the slightest sign of fear, but he even displayed excitement. The next moment, Feng swung his hand and began manipulating his mana body's power. Suddenly, with Feng as the center, a ripple spread into the surroundings. At the same time, a storm brewed in the surrounding space, causing even space to shudder. Boom, boom, boom. For a time, explosions echoed throughout the sky in rapid succession. The sky itself transformed into a sea of flames as the storm annihilated the thousands of fiery attacks. Afterward, the volcanic beasts enveloped by the storm knelt on the ground one after another. Only the Great Lord-ranked volcanic beasts remained standing. However, standing was pretty much all they could do, as even moving their bodies took grueling effort. As for the volcanic behemoth, the leader of the volcanic beasts, it didn't fare that much better than the Great Lord-ranked volcanic beasts either. My mana domain has improved to such an extent? Feng was astonished when he saw the thousands of kneeling volcanic beasts, and the volcanic behemoth, which had great difficulty moving his current mana domain, was actually capable of suppressing even a Grand Lord to such an extent. Despite being a strength-based demonic beast, the volcanic behemoth had barely half of its mobility left. If he used his mana domain against agility-based demonic creatures, the suppression effect would most likely be even more prominent. After a moment reveling in the improvement of his mana domain, Feng stopped being polite with the volcanic beasts. Immediately, he activated Blade Domain and began slaughtering the volcanic beasts with the 7 summoned magic swords. All his attacks dealt damage in the tens of millions, with critical hits causing over 100 million damage. In the case of the Lord-ranked volcanic beasts, which had only several hundred million HP, they fell after just 2 or 3 hits. In the end, it took Feng less than half an hour to annihilate the 3,000+ volcanic beasts. Even the volcanic behemoth failed to escape his grasp. Since Feng fought monsters of a higher level, his experience bar skyrocketed after the battle ended. Of course, as he had already reached Tier 4, monsters at the Lord rank and below granted him diminished EXP. Only those at the Great Lord rank and above granted him normal amounts of EXP. This could be considered one of the disadvantages of getting promoted to Tier 4. Even so, Feng still reached 34% of level 127 after the battle. His leveling speed was simply phenomenal. At this rate, he could easily level up twice by the end of the day. However, he wasn't the slightest bit surprised by this situation. In God's domain, after one reached Tier 4, leveling up became a very simple task. All one needed to do was search for places with a lot of monsters. Hence, in the past, Tier 4 players would complain about the lack of grinding spots in God's domain. Often, the task of searching for monsters was much more troublesome for Tier 4 players than the task of killing monsters. What was even more troublesome was collecting the monsters' loot. The time it took to collect the loot of the monsters they killed was several times longer than the time it took to kill the monsters. Sure enough, the loot collection process is much more tiresome than the grinding process. Feng got a headache when he saw all the loot scattered within a 1,000-yard radius of himself. At this moment, he finally understood the suffering of those Tier 4 experts in the past. However, ignoring the loot wasn't an option either. After all, these monsters dropped considerably excellent loot. Among the items dropped were standard magic crystals, fire-attributed magic crystals, and various rare ores. The fire-attributed magic crystals were especially valuable, worth far more than the standard magic crystal. Attributed magic crystals were essential in the production of certain epic weapons and equipment. Some peak constructions also required attributed magic crystals to build. However, attributed magic crystals were incredibly rare in the modern God's domain. Hence, it would be a massive waste to simply ignore the loot. Feng ended up spending 2 whole hours gathering all of the items scattered across the battlefield. However, he had to admit that he had earned a huge harvest. Even if he ignored the numerous level 130 bronze, mysterious iron, secret silver, and fine gold weapons and equipment he got, just the magic crystals numbered over 4,000 already. He had also picked up over 300 fire-attributed magic crystals. Afterward, he killed several more groups of monsters in the anti-magic volcano, pushing his level from 127 to 128, the total number of magic crystals collected to beyond 30,000, and the number of fire-attributed magic crystals collected to 1,500. Be it his leveling speed or money-making speed, both exceeded the standard of ordinary Tier 4 players. Since the sky was darkening, Feng found a safe cave and called up his system interface. That's enough for today. With several more days grinding here, I should be able to exceed the average level of the peak experts here. By then I shouldn't be at a disadvantage in levels when the infant dragon raid takes place. When Feng saw that he had already reached 19% of level 128, he found his leveling speed very satisfactory. Not to mention he had managed to produce 7 crystals of souls through today's grind, far more than what he could produce in the modern god's domain. Afterward, Feng logged out of the game to rest. After all, he had already spent more than 24 hours online. Even if he was using the fearless cabin now, staying online for long periods still wasn't wise. Once he went offline, before he could even climb out of his cabin, a message notification sounded in his cabin. The message's sender was none other than Liang Jing, the person managing Zero Wing's headquarters on his behalf right now. Guild leader, you finally decided to pick up. Liang Jing said in exasperation. I've already brought the 2 vice guild leaders to Yuantian City as per your request. What should we do now? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You're here already? Surprised by Liang Jing's swift action, Feng chuckled and said, okay, bring them to the upper zone's entrance now. I'll wait for you there. The upper zone's entrance? Liang Jing couldn't help growing a little excited at Feng's words. Okay, we'll be there in 3 hours. Feng burst into laughter at Liang Jing's excited expression. However, he understood her mood. After all, the upper zone was a place countless people yearned to enter. But this is a problem. I only managed to get 100 points yesterday, even after exchanging all of the credits I had. If the 2 of them join me, I can't even afford food for the 3 of us. It seems I'll have to convert those 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal now. The thought of the food prices here gave Feng a headache. Fortunately, he had earned a killing from mythology. Otherwise, he would have to start begging for food. Feng tidied himself up and hurried to the Green God Tower. Chapter 2780. Minor character? Upper Zone, Base Layer. Feng enjoyed the scenery of the base layer as he strolled around the residential area he lived in. Contrary to his expectations, he did not see any of the paradisiacal sceneries depicted in the rumors spread in the outside world. Instead, what he saw were only high-rise buildings. The areas not occupied by high-rise buildings held facilities such as restaurants, training halls, and gyms. Moreover, compared to the outside world, almost all of the people gave the impression that they were incredibly busy, and they all had tense expressions on their faces. This could be considered natural. After all, the upper zone wasn't some kind of paradise. Instead, it was a place with far more intense competition than the outside world. From what Feng understood, Yuantian City's upper zone had a population of less than 300,000, nearly a quarter of which were employees of the Green God Company. As for the remaining inhabitants, the majority of them belonged to the various major corporations, and only a small portion were people who had entered the upper zone through special selections or reserved slots. Meanwhile, unlike what the general public thought, one wouldn't live a carefree life after entering the upper zone. On the contrary, one would face even greater pressure than when they lived in the outside world. The reason for this was the upper zone's ridiculously high cost of living. Just the matter of food already gave Feng a headache. Even the most basic meal cost 30 points, equivalent to 300,000 credits. Nobody would pay such an absurd price for food in the outside world. Yet, in the upper zone, this amount of money would buy only the most basic meal. This was still only a small problem in the upper zone. The truly troublesome aspect was the various training resources available here. Just living in the upper zone wouldn't be enough for a person to achieve longevity. One still needed to include various exercises and medicines into the equation, all of which cost a lot of points. Without sufficient wealth and resources, one couldn't live in the upper zone at all. Those born in the upper zone were allowed to live freely until the age of 12. Afterward, they had to undergo a series of tests until they reached 15. If they failed the tests, they would be banished from the upper zone. Moreover, passing the Green God Company's basic assessment would only qualify one to work at the lowest level of the Green God Company. Only if one conquered the mental path before the age of 20 or made a great contribution to the Green God Company would one gain authority and be considered an ordinary person in the upper zone. If one wished to live longer and better in the upper zone, and perhaps even gain influence and become someone respected by the major corporations, one would have to head to the middle layer. Otherwise, one would only be an ant living in the base layer. After all, the base layer's average lifespan might be 150 years, but that didn't mean every individual would live up to 150 years old. Moreover, there was also the matter of retaining one's youth and physical vitality. For residents living in the base layer, even if they could live a fulfilling life and constantly supplement themselves with the various resources available in the base layer, they could retain their youth until the age of 50 at most. Afterward, their physical fitness would decline. By the time they reached 100 years old, they would have entered old age. However, in the case of people living in the middle layer, they would still retain their youthful vitality even at the age of 80. Appearance-wise, they would look like they were just entering their 30s. In other words, the middle layer's residents got to retain their youth for nearly twice as long as the base layer's residents. And even at the age of 120, they would only be middle-aged and look like they were just entering their 40s. Who wouldn't go crazy at such a temptation? After strolling about for a while, Feng rode one of the upper zone's free levitating smart cars and arrived at the Green God Tower roughly 20 minutes later. At the end of the journey, he had to admit that the upper zone was truly amazing. The various transportation facilities here were completely free, and the cars were even equipped with fully intelligent navigation systems. He could travel anywhere he wished with just a word. Feng made his way to the Green God Tower's 7th floor, which was where all resource exchanges took place in the base layer. Everyone seeking to convert credits into trade points, exchange rare resources for trade points and contribution points, or exchange points for the various medicines the Green God Company offered would come here. Upon arriving on the 7th floor, he found that the hall, which was the size of 8 basketball courts, was crowded with thousands of people. Compared to the registration room he visited previously, this place was many times livelier. Most of the gathered people were wealthy children seeking to exchange for trade points using credits. As to why they were doing so, the reason was simple. Most, if not all, of the major corporations operating in the upper zone had existed for over a century already. After operating for such a long time, the shareholder families running these corporations had grown significantly in size. At this point, with how large the shareholder families' population had become, these families would be fortunate to put their children into the upper zone. In addition, the resources the Green God Company sought were all incredibly rare and valuable. For the sake of their own future in the upper zone, the various corporations wouldn't let the children of their shareholder families casually exchange resources for points at all. Hence, aside from the designated heir or heiress of their respective families, the other children who had entered the upper zone would have to rely on themselves to secure resources in the upper zone. However, as most of these children were not particularly talented, they naturally didn't have the means to get the necessary resources or achievements to earn themselves a lot of trade points and contribution points. They could only visit the exchange center every day to exchange for trade points using credits. As a result, despite the Green God Tower's exchange center being open 24/7, there would almost always be people lining up before the credit area's exchange counters. If news of such a scene were to reach the outside world, jaws would definitely drop. After all, every one of the wealthy children lining up in the exchange center was a prince or princess of a major corporation. Normally, they would have numerous people at their beck and call. Yet in the exchange center they had no choice but to behave like normal people and stand in line themselves. And even more surprisingly, none of these wealthy children in the queue was making a fuss. Unlike the credit area, there was only one exchange counter in the contribution area. Usually, almost nobody stood before this exchange counter, and anybody wishing to use its services could do so without having to wait. However, when Feng approached the contribution area, 2 people were already standing before the exchange counter there. Moreover, he actually recognized both of them. One of them was none other than Feng, the heir of the 5 States Corporation. Out of all the corporation heirs Feng had met before, Feng had the most exaggerated physical fitness. Feng also did not behave like the typical princeling of a major corporation. The person standing behind Feng was the butler Zhou Xian. "Young master, now that we've completed the Green God Company's assignment, I believe your total contribution points will reach 60,000 once the evaluation is complete and enter the top 10 rankings. If we factor in the corporation's decision to support you fully this time, I'm certain you'll be able to enter the top 3 in the contribution competition this time," Zhou Xian said excitedly. The contribution competition was held once every 3 months. The top 3 of the competition would gain the right to stay in the middle layer. Although the duration of the stay was only 3 short months, this was also one of the few ways the various corporations could gain access to the middle layer. Meanwhile, so long as Han Yifeng entered the middle layer, he could acquire resources that were far superior to what was available in the base layer. At that time, his status in the upper zone would immediately skyrocket. However, Han Yifeng remained indifferent to Zhou Linqiu's words. Shaking his head, he said, "While I am confident of getting into the top 5, my chances of getting into the top 3 are still slim. The people currently ranked among the top 3 have held those positions for the past 2 years. According to rumors, those 3 people are close to gaining high-grade authority. They will definitely do everything they can to retain their positions, so it won't be easy to surpass them in contributions. In fact, despite not having put in any real effort, they have already accumulated over 100,000 contribution points. If we show signs of trying to compete for the top 3, it wouldn't be strange if their points suddenly doubled or tripled." At Han Yifeng's words, Zhou Linqiu fell silent, acknowledging that the top 3 rankers were indeed a cut above everyone else. After all, those 3 people had already monopolized the top 3 positions of the contribution competition for the past 2 years. Trying to surpass them in contributions definitely wouldn't be an easy task. While Han Yifeng and Zhou Linqiu were conversing, the staff member manning the exchange counter finished calculating Han Yifeng's contribution. "Sir, after including the assignment you completed this time, you now have 62,425 contribution points accumulated. You are currently ranked 7th in the contribution competition." 7th. Han Yifeng did not feel particularly happy to hear that he was ranked 7th in the competition, taking the result in stride. After giving the staff member a nod, he promptly turned around to leave. The instant Han Yifeng and Zhou Linqiu turned around, they noticed Feng making his way to the counter. "Why is he here?" Zhou Linqiu rubbed his eyes in doubt when he saw Feng, who was dressed in white casuals. The upper zone was a place that countless people sought to enter but couldn't. The guild leaders of many superpowers didn't have the qualifications to enter the upper zone even now. Yet Feng, who was merely the guild leader of a pseudo-superpower, had actually entered it. This was simply incredible. At this time, let alone Zhou Linqiu, even Han Yifeng revealed a rare look of surprise on his face. When Han Yifeng last met Feng in Fenglin City's Redstone restaurant, the latter was merely an insignificant minor character in his eyes. After all, Feng and his subordinates simply weren't capable of reaching the playing field Han Yifeng fought on. At best, he could only use Zero Wing as a pawn to hinder his opponents. Even when Zero Wing developed rapidly and became enemies with many superpowers, he still thought nothing of the guild. After all, what the various major corporations were truly competing for wasn't God's domain, but the upper zone's resources. Yet now, a minor character like Feng had actually set foot into the upper zone. This situation was as unbelievable as a fairy tale. Did the Boulder Corporation give him a reserved slot? Han Yifeng muttered in speculation. That should be the case. Otherwise, there's no way someone like him with no background can enter the upper zone, Zhou Linqiu said, nodding in agreement. In the recent struggle for the reserve seats of God's domain's 12 great guilds, Frost Heaven had surpassed everyone's expectations and secured itself a seat, instantly becoming a true titan in God's domain. The biggest contributor to Frost Heaven's victory was undoubtedly Zero Wing. Hence, it wouldn't be strange for Frost Heaven to grant Zero Wing a few of the upper zone's reserved slots in gratitude. After thinking up to this point, Han Yifeng and Zhou Linqiu calmed down. Meanwhile, as Feng walked over, he merely glanced at Han Yifeng and Zhou Linqiu before continuing on his way. He did not take the initiative to say hello. After all, he wasn't exactly familiar with the two. He was also in a hurry right now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Zhou Linqiu's expression turned ugly at Feng's response. He never imagined that Feng would actually show so little respect to Han Yifeng. The man didn't even bother saying hello and merely walked away like a stranger. Feng simply didn't place the Five States Corporation in his eyes. However, before Zhou Linqiu could vent his anger, he was stunned to see Feng stop before the contribution area's exchange counter. What is he trying to do? Han Yifeng was confused when he saw Feng conversing with the staff member at the counter. That's the exchange counter for the contribution area. Did he come here to exchange for trade points because there was no line here? Sure enough, he is a minor character. He only knows how to head to places where he can gain advantages. He thinks he can save time by coming here, yet he is wholly ignorant of the rules. Xianxia sneered as he looked at Feng, who was still conversing with the staff in contempt. However, no sooner had Xianxia finished speaking than the nearby staff member suddenly exclaimed in a loud and excited tone, "Congratulations, Mr. Shi. You have gained a total of 50,000 contribution points and 5 million trade points this time. You are currently ranked 10th in the contribution competition." Chapter 2781. Times have changed. 50,000 contribution points? 10th place? When Xianxia heard the Green God Company's staff's words, he was dumbfounded. In fact, even Feng, who possessed an apathetic personality, felt a little dazed at the staff member's words. After all, Feng was initially only a pawn in their eyes. Yet not only did he climb up to the same playing field they fought on, but he was now even actively competing with them. No wonder he didn't put us in his eyes. Realization dawned upon Xianxia as he looked at Feng. However, a moment later, a hint of mockery appeared on his face as he said, "It's a pity he doesn't know that the contribution competition participants are just warming up and that the current rankings are only temporary." The upper zone's contribution competition had been going on for many years now, and everyone mostly understood how it worked. Those intent on participating in a particular season's competition generally wouldn't reveal their cards in the first 2 months of the season. This was because contribution points were basically trump cards for participants. Naturally, it would be best if participants hid their cards as deeply as possible and only revealed them at the last possible moment. Only then could these trump cards play a vital role. Moreover, there was an added benefit to accumulating contribution points in secret. Deciding whether one would continue participating in a particular season's contribution competition or not. After all, aside from time-based assignments, other forms of contributions could be reserved for future competitions if necessary. Since the contribution competition had been running for many years now, some participants had been accumulating contribution points for a long time. These participants were waiting for the fateful day when they would reveal all their cards, instantly securing one of the top 3 positions and gain access to the middle layer. Meanwhile, the current contribution competition was less than a month along. Hence, the various participants were still testing the waters and had yet to seriously invest their contribution points. The majority of their current points were from completing time-based assignments the Green God Company issued, not from long-term assignments that could be turned in at any time. Although I don't know why he made such a move, this is a good opportunity for us, Feng said, shaking his head as he regained his calm. Old Zhou, go talk to him and tell him I'll buy the remaining points he has kept hidden at double the price. Double the price? Xianxia looked at Feng in surprise. Young master, historically, purchasing points at 1.5 times their original value is already pretty high. After all, there is no way these people can secure one of the top 3 rankings. There's no meaning for them to hold on to their points. If other people were to find out that you're offering to purchase his hidden points at double the price, they'd most likely raise their own prices as well. There were many instances where multiple participants joined hands to compete in the contribution competition. After all, unlike contribution points gained through completing assignments, points gained through other sources could be freely traded in secret. When a competition was about to end, participants who were close to the top 3 positions would often purchase the hidden points of other participants. Naturally, as Feng was aiming for one of the top 3 positions this time, he would also participate in this practice. The exchange rate would be based on the prices of the items sold by the Green God Company. Just do as I say. The Green God Company announced that the top 20 participants would receive a reward. So many people are trying to compete for the top 20 positions. It is only natural for the price of contribution points this time to be higher, Feng said, shaking his head. According to the information he had obtained, the Green God Company intended to further squeeze the various corporations for their wealth. To do so, the company had intensified the competition by allowing the top 20 participants to exchange for a limited number of items exclusive to the middle layer. Once this information spread, the price of contribution points would definitely increase. However, while a price hike was inevitable, the increase wouldn't be exaggerated either. After all, there were only so many items the top 20 participants could exchange using contribution points. Beyond that purchase limit, whatever contribution points they had remaining would become useless. I understand. Zhou Xian nodded and walked toward Feng. On the other side, Feng was currently ecstatic. Just a second ago he had still been a poor bastard in the upper zone. Now, however, he had 5 million trade points to his name, enough to purchase 5 ordinary housing units in the base layer. Of course, these points were still insufficient to purchase a large villa in the base layer. However, they were definitely more than adequate for his daily expenditure. At the very least, even after welcoming gentle snow and aqua rose into the upper zone, he wouldn't have to worry about their necessities. However, it's going to be difficult to get another large influx of points. It seems I'll have to think of a long-term way to secure 7 luminaries crystals in bulk, Feng thought with a sigh. 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal was a significant amount, yet it was only enough to get him 5 million trade points and 50,000 contribution points. With just this many trade points and contribution points, let alone catching up with the top 3 rankers of the competition, he probably couldn't afford anything from the middle layer. However, for his present self, obtaining more 7 luminaries crystals wasn't much of a challenge. After all, he was currently in the ancient god's domain. The resources available in the ancient era were far more abundant than in the modern era. After verifying on his quantum watch that he had received the 5 million trade points and 50,000 contribution points, Feng planned to head for the upper zone's entrance to receive gentle snow and aqua rose. After all, this was the first time they were visiting the upper zone. Without anyone to guide them, it was very easy for problems to occur. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. There were many taboos in the upper zone. If they accidentally violated one of these taboos, there was a high chance they would be banished from the upper zone permanently. However, before Feng could leave the exchange counter, Zhou Xian appeared beside him. Guild leader Shi, we meet again. Although Zhou Xian felt displeased at Feng's earlier attitude as Feng's butler, he still greeted Feng politely. Master Zhou, do you have business with me? Feng asked calmly as he looked at Zhou Xian. Inwardly, though, Feng was a little surprised by this situation. Although he had expected Feng to seek him out sooner or later, he never thought that the man would act so quickly. Crue had informed him about the ins and outs of the contribution competition, so he knew that those competing for the top 3 spots would secretly purchase contribution points from other participants. Now that he had just exchanged for 50,000 contribution points in one fell swoop, those seeking the top 3 spots couldn't ignore his existence. Indeed I do. Moreover, this is great news for you, guild leader Shi, Zhou Xian said with a faint smile. I believe you know about the matters regarding the contribution competition already, so I'll get straight to the point. Young Master Han wishes to purchase the contribution points you have yet to turn in. Moreover, young Master Han is willing to purchase them at double their market value. May I know what you think of this, guild leader Shi? Chapter 2782, Wealthy Feng. Double the market value? Feng was a little surprised when he heard Zhou Xian's words. According to Crue, the transaction price for contribution points would reach 1.5 times the market value at most. Moreover, that was when the contribution competition was incredibly intense. After all, unless one entered the middle layer, it didn't matter how many contribution points one managed to accumulate. Yet Feng was offering double the market value. Even if the Green God Company would allow the top 20 participants to exchange for 3 items from the middle layer this time, this was still a very high price. After all, the difficulty of getting into the top 3 was simply too great. Before Feng looked into the current top 3 participants, he had still been confident of getting into the top 3. However, after gaining an understanding of those 3 participants, all thoughts of entering the top 3 had disappeared from his mind. This was because those 3 people could instantly gain an additional 1 million contribution points if they grew serious. In other words, if he wished to secure one of the top 3 positions, he would need 100,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal at the very minimum. What did this amount represent? Even if he squeezed the 5 great super guilds and a dozen other superpowers dry, getting such a huge number of 7 luminaries crystals was impossible. Moreover, this was only the minimum requirement to compete for the top 3 positions. Hence he had no choice but to wait for Zero Wing to grow stronger and set aside trying for one of the top 3 spots for the future. In the current competition he simply had no chance whatsoever. Even if he was currently in the ancient god's domain with its more abundant resources, the 7 luminaries crystal was still an incomparably valuable commodity. Moreover, its rarity was not the slightest bit lower than in the modern era. In fact, competition for the 7 luminaries crystal was intenser in the ancient era. From what he heard, the interstellar continent's various powers were similarly purchasing 7 luminaries crystals at astronomical prices. Residents of the interstellar continent could exchange for living resources in the real world using 7 luminaries crystals. In fact, if one collected a sufficient number of 7 luminaries crystals, one could even get promoted from an ordinary civilian to a resident of the core area. Simply put, every player in the ancient era was competing for 7 luminaries crystals. On the other hand, only the major corporations based in upper zones were competing for 7 luminaries crystals in the modern god's domain. The competition over the crystals had nothing to do with ordinary players. In fact, it didn't even have anything to do with ordinary corporations. Hence, even if he were to contest frantically for 7 luminaries crystals in the ancient era, the amount he could get his hands on was unlikely to secure him one of the top 3 spots in the current contribution competition. Now he would be satisfied so long as he could secure one of the top 20 positions, and he could indeed afford to sell a portion of his additional points. That's right. Double the market value. Guild leader Sure, you should be able to see young Master Han's sincerity in this matter, Xianxia said, chuckling. I can assure you that you won't find another person in the base layer who would offer you such a price. The 5 States Corporation was one of the top corporations in the country. It had deeper foundations than even the Boulder Corporation, albeit by only a slight margin. In addition, the corporation even had a genius like Han Yifeng as its heir. It was only a matter of time before the corporation set foot in the middle layer. After giving the matter some thought, Feng replied, I can agree to that price, but I have a condition. Han Yifeng's offer would tempt anyone. After all, this was equivalent to receiving a 50% discount on the various products the Green God Company put up for exchange. For Feng, who was currently severely lacking in the upper zone's resources, Han Yifeng's offer was heaven-sent. Condition? What condition? Xianxia frowned slightly. In his opinion, the price Han Yifeng offered was already quite generous. He never thought that Feng would want a foot after getting an inch. I want to settle the transaction using life potions, phantom potions, or the middle layer's limited products, Feng said. I will not accept anything else apart from these items. 5 million trade points were already more than enough for him to get by in the base layer. There was no point in getting more. Only the limited exchange items were of value to him. Particularly, the life potion and the phantom potion weren't available in the outside world. Even if he tried to exchange for these items using his authority, he could get only 5 bottles per year. This amount wasn't even enough for his own use, much less sharing it with other people. This condition is too much. You should know that those items can't be bought even with a large number of trade points and contribution points. Xianxia flatly refused Feng's condition. Nobody in the entire base layer would satisfy this condition of yours. Whether it was the life potion, the phantom potion, or the middle layer's limited items, they were all incredibly precious to the various corporations. No one would casually trade them away. How about I buy them at their original price? Feng suggested. Feng understood that he was indeed asking for a lot with his condition. However, this was also how negotiations worked. Only after both sides agreed on a price could a transaction take place. Xianxia fell speechless at Feng's response. He felt that Feng didn't understand his previous words at all. However, before Xianxia could manage a response, Han Yifeng's holographic projection suddenly appeared from Xianxia's quantum watch. It is impossible for me to sell those items at base price. However, with my authority I can sell some to you at double the price. This is also the lowest I can go, Han Yifeng said. Moreover, I believe that nobody else in the base layer would offer you a better price. That works. Feng didn't feel particularly surprised at Han Yifeng's counter-offer. On the contrary, he found this outcome to be quite excellent already. The limited items the Green God Company offered for exchange came with fixed price tags, and residents with the necessary authority could exchange for these items at any time. However, as their description suggested, each resident could exchange for only a limited number of these items. If a person wanted to get their hands on more, they could purchase these items from other residents at a marked-up price. Moreover, even if one were willing to pay the extra cost, one wouldn't necessarily be able to find a willing seller. That settles it then. Han Yifeng nodded. However, let me get one thing straight first. Every transaction we conduct must be valued at 50,000 contribution points or more. Otherwise, our transaction will be invalid. That won't be a problem, Feng assured, smiling. He understood what was going through Feng's mind. A sum of several thousand contribution points was most likely nothing in Feng's eyes. Moreover, such an amount wouldn't be of any help to him in the contribution competition. After all, if the top 3 participants were serious, they could easily add 1,000,000 points to their names. Hence, a transaction of 50,000 contribution points was most likely the lowest acceptable amount for Feng. Hey. So long as you've collected 50,000 contribution points, you can come and find me at any time, Feng said before disconnecting the quantum communication. After Feng finished speaking, Xianxia turned around and walked away, leaving Feng alone at the exchange counter. When Xianxia returned to Feng's side, he had a hesitant expression. Just speak your mind, Feng said as he looked at his old butler. Young master, I'm afraid the old master and the others will have big opinions about your decision to sell him those items at just double the price, Xianxia said worriedly. After all, those items are things the corporation went to great lengths to accumulate. They are meant to serve as the foundation for the family's younger generations. Foundation. Feng suddenly smiled. Unless we enter the middle layer, the 5 states corporation will be nothing but ants in the eyes of those above. Also, we have failed to enter the middle layer after all these years. If we don't fight now, when will we fight? Moreover, the family has already promised to assist me with everything they have. If they're not even willing to part with these items, how are we supposed to compete with the other participants? However, just Feng's 50,000 contribution points won't change anything, Xianxia said. I naturally know this. Feng is only one of the small sources for me to secure contribution points. At this point, Feng's eyes began glowing slightly. The old man has already met with the other corporations in the upper zone and made some promises to them. I believe he should have no problems securing 700,000 or 800,000 contribution points for me. Afterward, it'll depend on whether I can complete the Green God Company's bounty. So long as I succeed, I am certain I can enter the top 3. He was hell-bent on winning the contribution competition this time. Meanwhile, after Feng and Xianxia left the exchange center, Feng made his way to the item exchange counter. Compared to the contribution points counter, the item exchange counter had many more people lined up before it. After waiting in line for around 15 minutes, Feng exchanged for 5 phantom potions and 5 life potions, as well as 5 strengthening potions, which cost the same as the phantom potions and life potions. In the end, he spent a total of 75,000 trade points. In the outside world, that was already equivalent to 750 million credits. The strengthening potion was considered the least promising product in the upper zone because it had only one function: the strengthening of the user's physical fitness. However, residents in the upper zone would have their physical fitness automatically raised to a certain level, even without any training. If one combined this effect with daily exercise, they could elevate their physical fitness to astonishing levels. Hence, there was simply no need to spend 5,000 trade points to exchange for a strengthening potion. Nevertheless, Feng naturally believed it was better for him to raise his physical fitness as quickly as possible. After all, the stronger his physical fitness became, the easier it would be to improve his brain activity. Often, when Feng gained enlightenment and achieved a qualitative improvement in his techniques, he would find himself facing various problems stemming from his inadequate physical fitness. Had he been as fit as Feng during those times, he wouldn't have faced any problems at all. Hence, he felt that it wasn't a loss to spend 25,000 trade points for 5 strengthening potions. Not to mention he could already be considered a wealthy person in the base layer. It's almost time to pick up Xianxia and Aqua. After taking a look at the time, Feng promptly departed the Green God Tower and hurried over to the upper zone's entrance. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. 2 hours later, a levitating car stopped at a designated parking lot before the gigantic metal door serving as the upper zone's entrance. 4 people, 1 man and 3 women then alighted from the car. They were none other than Lei Bao, Liang Jing, Bai Qingxue and Aqua Rose. As to why Lei Bao had come along, it was as a precaution. After all, many powers were currently targeting Zero Wing. Meanwhile, Liang Jing, someone with little combat power, was unsuited for going out alone. Hence, Lei Bao would usually accompany her whenever she left Zero Wing's headquarters. Ordinary bodyguards would have little to no use against the opponent's Zero Wing faced. So, this is the upper zone? Liang Jing was surprised when she saw the vast steel wall at the upper zone's entry. Even Lei Bao was surprised by the sight. He never thought that the rumored upper zone would have such an appearance. Chapter 2783 Era of Hegemony Upper Zone, Entrance. While Liang Jing and Lei Bao were shocked by the sight before them, Feng, who had been waiting quietly by the entrance for some time, approached them. How is it? It's different from what you imagined, right? Feng asked, smiling faintly as he looked at the two. Their expressions and thoughts were exactly the same as his when he first arrived before the upper zone. Guild leader, how is the upper zone? Liang Jing asked as she looked at Feng. Is it as amazing as the rumors make it out to be? There were many rumors circulating in the outside world about the upper zones. Nobody was allowed to go near the upper zones without permission despite them being in the middle of bustling cities. Hence, while everyone knew of the upper zone's existence, no outsider truly understood them. In fact, there was not the smallest piece of official news on the upper zone in the world. The information everyone knew came only from rumors. Lei Bao couldn't help pricking up his ears at Liang Jing's question. To him, the upper zone was a place he never even dared to dream of visiting. After all, even world champions in fighting couldn't visit it. It's amazing. Feng replied with a smile. It's even more amazing than the rumors make it out to be. The people inside can constantly grow stronger physically without doing any training. So, is it true that even world champion level fighters are not a big deal in the upper zone? Lei Bao asked when he heard Feng's words. The fact that a place could automatically improve a person's physical fitness was simply unbelievable. This revelation thoroughly shattered his view of physical training. That rumor is slightly exaggerated, but it's not far off from the truth either, Feng replied, not trying to conceal the truth. Even without physical training, the upper zone's residents can still achieve a physical fitness rivaling Henglian masters. With some systematic training, their physical fitness becomes even more astonishing. It's actually such an amazing place? Lei Bao was shocked. He had undergone plenty of intense training to achieve his current physical fitness, yet the upper zone's residents could easily accomplish a similar feat without any training. Who would possibly believe this? However, Lei Bao knew that Feng wouldn't lie to him, so this inflicted an even greater shock. All of a sudden, Lei Bao felt as if he had lived his life for nothing. He felt as if all his previous efforts were nothing but a joke. Master Lei Bao, no need to be discouraged. Looking at Lei Bao, who suddenly grew disheartened, Feng said, Zero Wing will also develop in the upper zone in the future. At that time it won't be just Qingxue, Aqua and myself who can enter this place. I will let many more people join us. Just like those international corporations, we will treat the upper zone as our headquarters. Although Feng did not speak loudly, both Lei Bao and Liang Jing gasped involuntarily at his words. At the same time, a hint of anticipation and excitement flashed in their eyes. If anyone else had made this statement, they would have most likely treated it as a joke. However, Feng was someone who constantly worked miracles, having single-handedly developed Zero Wing to its current scale. Moreover, he never did anything he was not confident of succeeding in. His declaration meant that he had some way to achieve this goal. Zero Wing will also develop in the upper zone in the future? Liang Jing couldn't help growing excited when she looked at the distant steel wall. If Zero Wing really accomplished this feat, it would truly become a powerful existence. At that time, even ordinary superpowers would be a joke to the guild. Lei Bao clenched his fists in excitement and anticipation. He felt that his decision to join Zero Wing was the wisest choice he had made in his life. These 3 bottles here are strengthening potions. Liang Jing, take 2 back and give them to Fire and Violet, Feng said as he took out 3 strengthening potions and handed 2 to Liang Jing. He then turned to Lei Bao and said, Master Lei Bao, you take one as well. I believe that you should be able to go a step further with this strengthening potion. Fire Dance and Violet Cloud normally trained their physical bodies very seriously. The 2 of them also possessed incredible talent in this regard. Unfortunately, due to insufficient resources, their improvements had been gradual. With the strengthening potion's assistance, their development would no longer be hindered. As for Lei Bao, he also possessed excellent talent. Unfortunately, as he had always been a lone wolf, he never managed to get his hands on any resources and could only rely on hard work. However, he had reached the point where he couldn't improve further through hard work alone. Although Feng had previously given Lei Bao several bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids, which allowed him to improve his physical fitness significantly, it was evident that S-rank nutrient fluids alone couldn't fully bring out Lei Bao's potential. However, with the strengthening potion, Lei Bao might be able to go a step further and become a half-step Henglian Grandmaster. Meanwhile, if Lei Bao succeeded, then Zero Wing would gain an additional layer of protection. Thank you, Guild Leader. I won't disappoint you. Lei Bao's eyes shone with gratitude as he looked at Feng. He had heard of the strengthening potion before. This thing was basically treated as a divine item in the fighting industry. Just one bottle could allow a person's physical fitness to undergo a qualitative transformation. Unfortunately, the medicine was incredibly rare, much rarer than even the life potion. According to rumors, even Grandmaster martial artists had difficulty getting their hands on a bottle. In fact, some Grandmasters would even put their lives on the line just to get their hands on it. Yet Feng not only took out 3 bottles but even gave him one. How could Lei Bao not grow excited in this situation? With this strengthening potion, he was confident that even if he couldn't become a Henglian Grandmaster, he could at least reach a level where he could contend with neutralizing Grandmasters. By the way, Guild Leader, more and more NPCs are appearing in God's domain. As a result, some superpowers have designs on the Secret Covenant Tower. In fact, they've already clashed with us over a dozen times outside Sky Spring City. Currently, both sides have lost over 1,000 Tier 3 players, Liang Jing said suddenly. Fortunately, Vice Guild Leader Illusory Words and Vice Guild Leader Unyielding Heart returned in time to preside over the situation. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. However, the two of them believe that if this situation continues, their 2 guilds are unlikely to hold back the various superpowers for very long. Moreover, some small guilds have already begun disbanding due to the NPC population pressure. Many new NPC forces have also emerged in the various NPC cities, and these NPC forces are constantly harassing the local guilds and pose a headache even for the various superpowers. Hence, the various superpowers are all trying to enter the Secret Covenant Tower, which doesn't have NPC intervention. Moreover, I'm afraid that they will only grow more desperate as the NPC forces scale up their harassment. Feng frowned upon hearing Liang Jing's report on God's domains and the Secret Covenant Tower's present situation. He hadn't anticipated that the NPC forces would actually begin taking action so soon. Moreover, with the NPC forces now taking action, the main continent of God's domain would enter an era where hundreds of countries fought for hegemony. To survive the upcoming chaos, the various superpowers would probably do everything they could to secure the sacred leveling ground known as the Secret Covenant Tower. I understand. After giving the matter some thought, Feng looked at Liang Jing and instructed, for now, have everyone in the guild avoid going out to do quests if possible instead. Have them focus on grinding in the Secret Covenant Tower and restrict their sphere of activity to Sky Spring City and our 3 guild cities. Also, have Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul hasten their exploration. It doesn't matter even if it increases the chances of the secret getting out. Our side will do the same as well. Originally, he thought that it would take the NPC forces another 2 weeks to take action. However, contrary to his expectations, the NPC forces had evidently completed their investigations already and made a move. Once begun, the NPC forces' harassment would only escalate as time passed. It wouldn't be long before members of player forces would get attacked if they left the confines of towns and cities. Given enough time, NPC forces would even start launching attacks on guild towns and cities, forcing the various guilds to abandon their guild towns and cities. This, in turn, would cripple the guild's income and force them to disband. I'll contact them once I return. Liang Jing nodded. Feng gave Liang Jing a few more instructions, such as secretly collecting the basic materials needed to construct the small mobile fortress, then brought Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose into the upper zone. As for Liang Jing and Lei Bao, after looking at the 3 of them enviously for a moment, they promptly left in the levitating car. In the upper zone, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose's condition immediately saw slight improvements. Now they no longer looked as cold and indifferent as before. The degree of mental deterioration they suffered also declined significantly. After they consumed the luxury set meals, which Feng bought for 300 trade points each, their mental states even showed signs of stabilizing. They also no longer appeared indifferent to everything around them. At the very least, they display some interest in the upper zone's matters. Occasionally they even took the initiative to say a few words. Seeing the two's condition stabilizing, Feng breathed out a sigh of relief. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The environment here should sustain the two of them for a long time. The next step is to figure out a way to consolidate my standing within the top 20. After seeing Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose enter their respective fearless cabins, Feng started planning how to earn 7 luminaries crystals in God's domain. Although he was currently ranked 10th in the contribution competition, the other participants had yet to take things seriously. Meanwhile, the competition's top 20 participants being able to exchange for 3 items from the middle layer presented a huge opportunity for the various corporations. They would definitely do everything they could to enter the top 20. If he wished to secure his position within the top 20, he would need 200,000 contribution points at the very least, and possibly more if the competition was intense. After all, the various corporations had been operating in the upper zone for a long time now. The wealth they had accumulated wasn't something he could hope to rival. In other words, he was still short of 15,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals right now. This was an astronomical number even for the 5 great super guilds. Afterward, Feng drank a strengthening potion and life potion before lying down in the fearless cabin in his bedroom. Log in. Chapter 2784, Tier 4 Upper Rank Anti-Magic Mountain Range, Deep Valley. At the Anti-Magic Mountain Range's core area, the mana was scorching hot. Individuals without 300 points in fire resistance would instantly die upon entering Deep Valley. In addition, plenty of level 140 Great Lord ranked monsters occupied this place. Due to the environment, native Lord ranked monsters could exert power on the level of Great Lords, while Great Lord ranked monsters could exhibit combat power at the standard of Grand Lords. Let alone players, even Tier 4 NPCs of the same level wouldn't dare come here. However, a black shadow was currently flying through the flame-filled magma valley with over 100 Great Lord ranked magma colossi on its tail. All of these magma colossi were over 10 meters tall. When over a century of them ran together, their footsteps shook the valley. The commotion continuously attracted Lord-ranked monsters to join in the chase. Magma Colossus. Elemental creature, Great Lord. Level 140 HP 1,950,000,000. It seems this is the most I can attract in this area. After a glance at the Magma Colossi and Magma Golems chasing after him, Feng began chanting an incantation in midair. He had spent over a dozen minutes luring Magma Colossi. Despite his efforts, the group grew to just a little more than 100. Even the number of Lord-ranked Magma Golems only hovered around 3,000. When he tried luring more, some of the ones chasing after him would lose interest and return to their original locations. It was evident that the main god system did not want to allow Tier 4 players to slaughter these low-intellect elemental creatures freely. Hence, the system had granted them the instinct to remain in their respective territories. Meanwhile, as the Magma Colossi were about to get close enough to attack Feng, he completed the incantation for Flame Domain and released it. Originally, Flame Domain was only an AoE offensive spell. Its range and power weren't comparable to large-scale destruction spells. Even so, it still possessed incredible power. However, Feng's mana domain, mana quality, and the environment here had buffed Flame Domain to the point where it rivaled Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Even though the Magma Colossi and Magma Golems possessed high elemental resistance as elemental creatures, in front of absolute power, their HPs still fell rapidly. The monsters lost over 16 million HP every second. Moreover, the damage even increased by 20% every second. By the time Flame Domain's 7-second duration ended, the Magma Golems were already in tatters. They had clearly fallen into a heavily injured state. The Magma Colossi, though, fared much better, as they had lost only around 100 million HP and nothing else. If only I had a great wizard here. Just one Tier 4 curse would be enough to deal with the Lord-ranked rabble. Afterward, all I would have to do is focus on dealing with the Great Lords. Feng felt a little frustrated as he looked at the heavily injured Magma Golems. He had been grinding for 6 consecutive days now, and he had basically wiped out the monsters in the Anti-Magic Mountain Range's outer and inner areas. Now he was left with only the monsters in the core area to grind for EXP. However, the majority of the monsters here were only at the Lord rank, and they awarded him with barely any EXP when killed. Moreover, they took the most time to kill due to their numbers. Fortunately, he had quite a few AoE skills at his disposal. The 7 Luminaries Ring's flame domain was especially helpful. Without these skills, he would have collapsed from exhaustion just dealing with the Lord-ranked magma golems. The next moment after casting Flame Domain, Feng followed up with Lightning Edge. This Lightning Edge was completely different from the Lightning Edge he had used in the past. When he executed the skill now, it looked as if he had summoned a raging river in the sky, one that covered 200 yards. When the raging river flowed across the crowd of monsters, the weakened magma golems were instantly killed. The power of the skill was not the slightest bit weaker than that of Tier 4 skills. Lightning Edge was capable of exhibiting such power now because Feng had already upgraded it to the limits of Tier 3. The skill's current power was worlds apart from when it was still at Tier 1 and Tier 2. Of course, the amount of EXP Feng had to invest in the skill was astronomical. This was also why, despite having grinded for 6 consecutive days, Feng had only reached 53% of level 138. Otherwise, he would have long since shot past level 140. However, Feng didn't really care about losing so many levels. After reaching Tier 4, levels were no longer that important to players. For Tier 4 players, reaching level 150 or even level 200 was a simple task. After all, they could earn EXP many times faster than Tier 3 players. In front of a Tier 4 player, Great Lord-ranked monsters that Tier 3 players had difficulty dealing with were no different from common monsters. They merely had more HP and took more time to kill. Despite this being the case during Feng's previous life, one would often see Tier 4 players stuck at around level 130, even though Tier 3 players had reached level 145 already. The reason for this was simple. After reaching Tier 4, players would no longer gain significant improvements by relying on epic weapons and equipment. Only fragmented legendary weapons and equipment could help. Meanwhile, apart from obtaining fragmented legendary items, one other way Tier 4 players could improve their combat power by a large margin was through Tier 4 skills and spells. Hence, after reaching Tier 4, anyone with brains would search for Tier 4 skill and spell books. This was especially true for Tier 4 magical classes. A Tier 4 spell book was more valuable than several pieces of top-tier epic weapons and equipment. Of course, due to the rarity of Tier 4 skill and spell books, not all Tier 4 players would be lucky enough to invest their EXP into nurturing their skills to Tier 4. Instead, most Tier 4 players would have to spend legacy skill points to learn Tier 4 legacy skills. Such players would be fortunate to have 3 or 4 Tier 4 skills in their arsenal. This was also why most independent players who reached Tier 4 would possess high levels, while the various large guilds' Tier 4 experts would have low levels. After all, the search for Tier 4 skill books required a lot of manpower. They were not items that could be found easily by relying on one person's strength. Lightning Edge was a Tier 4 skill Feng had obtained from the Titan Library. Previously, when he was still at Tier 3, he couldn't gain EXP rapidly. Hence, he had always left the skill at Tier 2. Now that he had reached Tier 4, he naturally couldn't continue wasting the skill's potential. After all, the Titan Library was a place players could enter only 3 times in their entire lifetimes. In other words, players could obtain 3 skill books at most from there. Most of the players that had visited the Titan Library had left with Tier 4 skill books because the Tier 5 and Tier 6 skill books were not things ordinary people could obtain. Even now, Feng was not confident he could get his hands on a Tier 5 skill book. After all, the higher a player's tier was, the more challenging the trial they would face inside the Titan Library. Back then, he had managed to reach the library's central area because he was only at Tier 2. If he had visited the Titan Library when he was at Tier 3, he might not have reached the central area. Needless to say, now that he was at Tier 4, his chances of success were even lower. Hence, unless he spent his legacy skill points, he wouldn't be able to learn new Tier 4 skills for the foreseeable future. This fact remained true even though he was currently in the ancient god's domain. Even during the ancient era, Tier 4 skill books were not common goods. Following this, Feng spent around 20 minutes finishing off the remaining magma colossi. After he defeated all of the monsters chasing him, his experience bar had gone up from 53% to 66%. Unfortunately, while these monsters awarded a lot of EXP, it would be some time before they would respawn. Apart from the generous EXP, the core area's monsters also awarded much more lucrative loot. Just killing this group of monsters netted Feng over 500 fire-attributed magic crystals, 4,000 ordinary magic crystals and plenty of epic materials. As for the rest of the items the monsters dropped, Feng simply chucked them into his bag without checking. After all, it would take him a lot of time to inspect and organize all of the loot. To earn as much EXP as possible, he decided to ignore the items for now and have other people help him inspect the loot after he returned. As he had to admit that the benefits of reaching Tier 4 and grinding in high-level maps ahead of others were truly wonderful, especially in the ancient gods domain. Not only did he not have to worry about competition, but he could also earn resources by the truckload. Since he started grinding in the anti-magic mountain range until now, he had collected over 350,000 standard magic crystals and 43,000 fire-attributed magic crystals. Subsequently, Feng continued clearing out close to half of the magma colossi in the core area. His level had finally reached level 139 as a result. This was a level that even the ancient era's Tier 3 experts wouldn't dream of reaching at this point. With this much EXP, I should be able to upgrade Lightning Edge to Tier 4. After looking at Lightning Edge's skill window, Feng promptly chose to upgrade it to Tier 4. Feng's level dropped from 139 to 136. The skill had instantly devoured 3 levels worth of EXP. What a gluttonous fellow. Thank goodness I leveled up to 139 beforehand. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be at the average level of Tier 4 players right now. Feng smiled bitterly as he looked at his own level. If he hadn't leveled up to level 139, Lightning Edge's upgrade would have taken at least 4 levels worth of EXP, dropping him to level 135 or lower. However, the benefits he gained were correspondingly massive. With Lightning Edge at Tier 4, the skill would finally blossom and reveal its true power. Lightning Edge. Action type. Tier 4 upper rank. When skill completion rate reaches 120%, the skill can exhibit power at the Tier 4 peak rank. Channeling time. 0. 2 seconds deals 1200% physical and 1500% lightning damage in a cone in front of the user. Initial coverage range is 500 yards. Duration. 7 seconds cooldown. 10 minutes amazing. As expected of a Tier 4 skill from the Titan library, Feng was astonished when he read Lightning Edge's detailed introduction. It can already exhibit power at the Tier 4 upper rank standard even in its normal state. If I can execute it at 120% completion rate, combined with the skill's range, it is practically comparable to a Tier 4 taboo skill. As a swordsman, most of his skills were single-targeted, a huge limitation when fighting large numbers of monsters. However, Lightning Edge could now make up for this weakness. The only downside was the skill's relatively long cooldown. Even so, it would be more than enough to inflict heavy injuries on monsters and mythic bosses. Just as Feng was planning to continue grinding for levels, he suddenly received a message alert. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The sender of the message was Solitary 9, and the message's content was simple. Everyone has left their respective legacy lands already. That's quick of them. Feng smiled when he saw Solitary 9's message. Now that I've resolved the problem of my deficient skills and level, it's time to head back. He activated the 7 Luminaries Rings space movement, teleporting toward Meteorite City. As return scrolls did not exist in the ancient gods' domain, players had to rely on their own 2 feet to travel to NPC towns and cities, which was a great inconvenience. If not for him having reached Tier 4, which granted him the ability to fly freely, and the omnipotent 7 Luminaries Ring, returning to Meteorite City would take ages. However, perhaps that was why the ancient era's players did not surpass the modern era's players by too much in terms of levels, despite the ancient era's advantages over the modern era. 20 minutes later, Feng arrived before Meteorite City's entrance. Just like before, he could still see a ton of people coming and going. Chapter 2785. Differences gradually emerge. Meteorite City, Main Street. As Feng walked through the city's main street, he noticed a visible change in the city's players. The number of Tier 3 experts roaming the main street was around 10% more than before. While this increase didn't seem significant, if one street saw a 10% increase to its Tier 3 traffic, then the other streets should have experienced a similar increase as well. In other words, Meteorite City as a whole had gained a 10% increase to its Tier 3 player population. In the case of Meteorite City, Such an increase meant that the city had gained over 100,000 more Tier 3 experts, a number that probably exceeded even the total of the 5 great super guilds' Tier 3 experts. Aside from the Tier 3 player population, another evident change had also occurred to the city's atmosphere. To be precise, an atmosphere of tension and excitement now enveloped the city. Before Feng could start looking into the city's situation, though, he overheard a conversation between several Tier 3 experts in a nearby open-air bar. Crap. My application actually got rejected. I'm a level 131, Tier 3 ranger, for God's sake. Any other adventurer team or guild would be more than happy to welcome me with open arms. Skyflare is simply too arrogant. A tanned, robust youth snarled. A level 132 middle-aged man carrying a round shield shook his head and chuckled at the male youth's complaint. You're not the only one. The number of Tier 3 experts Skyflare is rejecting currently ranges between 700 to 1,000 daily. Less than 10% of those who apply at Skyflare actually get in. Moreover, Skyflare's recruitment criteria are growing stricter by the day. That's right. The present Skyflare is no longer the same as before. It already has 4 Tier 4 experts. Moreover, according to insider information, 2 of them managed to reach Tier 4 thanks to the Crystal of Souls and Soul Water. From what I heard, Skyflare still has plenty of Crystals of Souls and Soul Water. A level 131 Tier 3 assassin youth said, agreeing with the middle-aged man's words. I heard that one of those 2 newly promoted Tier 4 experts relied on only the Soul Water to get promoted, the middle-aged man added. The Crystal of Souls is incomparably rare, but it's a different story for the Soul Water. Even Skyflare's normal members have a chance to get a drop of soul water. Right now, if you lined up the people trying to join Skyflare, the line would probably extend from one end of the city to the other. I also heard that news of this has reached the neighboring city's Tier 3 experts, and many of them are already making their way to Meteorite City. Once they arrive, the number of Skyflare's applicants will definitely skyrocket. If I'd known something like this would happen, I would have joined Skyflare long ago. Even if I can't get my hands on a Crystal of Souls, I would still be able to get a drop of soul water and maybe get promoted to Tier 4 and live a good life in the civilian area, the assassin youth sighed. The Skyflare adventurer team had recently raised its recruitment standards. Now, even ordinary Tier 3 experts wouldn't be accepted. At the very least, one needed to be at the half-step Refinement Realm Standard or Truth Realm Standard to join. It seems Skyflare has recently developed quite a bit. When Feng overheard the Tier 3 players' conversation, he didn't feel particularly surprised. After all, the Skyflare adventurer team possessed a bunch of peak experts. In addition, unlike the modern era's experts, the ancient era's experts had long since regarded God's domain as their everything. The combat standards of the players here were far superior to those of the modern era's players. If not for the ancient God's domain lacking means of restoring one's concentration, there would have been many more Tier 4 players roaming the world. After all, the ancient era's players had a massive advantage when it came to getting promoted to Tier 4. Afterward, Feng eavesdropped on a few more conversations about Skyflare's and Meteorite City's current state. From what he heard, he understood that Skyflare was preparing to expand its influence to other NPC main cities, and it was recruiting the necessary manpower to do so. Once it had enough Tier 3 experts, it would most likely make a beeline for the neighboring main cities. As for the local player forces of those main cities, they would probably have difficulty stopping Skyflare's encroachment. This was welcome news for Feng. After all, the stronger Skyflare became, the easier obtaining all sorts of resources would be. After listening in on a few more conversations and finding no more useful information, Feng went to the Silver Hotel. Silver Hotel high-end room. When Feng entered the room, he found lifeless Thorn and the others waiting for him. Of the 5 people in the room, 3 looked elated while 2 looked crestfallen. Feng also noticed that the auras of the 3 had undergone a qualitative transformation. These 3 people were Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9 and Luo. As the 3 of them did not wear a black cloak to conceal themselves, their Tier 4 life auras were on full display. "Commander, we've let you down," Xianxia said in a depressed tone as she watched Feng walk over. Cleansing Whistle, who stood beside Xianxia, was also gloomy. It was evident she felt frustrated over her failure to get promoted to Tier 4. No need to be discouraged. Getting promoted to Tier 4 has never been easy. Even peak experts have a high chance of failure, let alone your present selves, Feng said in consolation. Moreover, now that you know where you're lacking, you can spend this time thinking of ways to address your flaws. I believe it won't be long before you too reach Tier 4 as well. Feng didn't feel particularly surprised by Xianxia and Cleansing Whistle's failure. In fact, he wouldn't even have found it strange if Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 had failed. After all, the Tier 4 promotion quest truly was a difficult hurdle to cross, one players couldn't overcome just by relying on combat standards. It required players to comprehend Tier 4 skills and spells under time constraints. However, there was a massive difference between Tier 3 and Tier 4 skills. Learning a Tier 4 skill to 80% completion rate within a limited period was an incredibly difficult feat. In fact, a large part of the reason why Feng had managed to complete his own promotion quest was his extensive experience, having undergone it several times before. In comparison, Xianxia and Cleansing Whistle did not have such experience. Hence their failure was very normal. According to past statistics, 99% of the various superpowers core members failed their Tier 4 promotion quest when they challenged it for the first time. Most never reached Tier 4. Those capable of reaching Tier 4 had normally experienced 2 or 3 failures before succeeding, with some even having suffered 5 or 6 failures. Hence, Tier 4 could be considered an invisible barrier that thoroughly distinguished players from each other. It was also because of this invisible barrier that an insurmountable gap had formed between the various superpowers and ordinary powers. Upon hearing Feng's words, Luo nodded subconsciously in agreement, as she had very nearly failed her promotion quest this time. Were it not for the Soul Water's help, she definitely wouldn't have finished learning her Tier 4 spell within the allotted time. Guild leader, can Whistle and I remain here then? Xianxia asked Feng. Unlike the modern God's Domain, players here were not required to search for their legacy land when challenging their Tier 4 promotion quest. They could attempt their promotion so long as they paid the necessary magic crystals. The only problem was that players who failed their promotion quest had to wait 20 natural days before they could challenge it again. This, Feng was at a loss as to how to answer Xianxia. I can't say for certain. I don't mind letting you challenge your promotion quests again 20 days later. However, I honestly don't know whether you can remain here for such a long period. The old man did not say how long they could stay in the ancient god's domain. They also didn't know what would hasten their departure from the ancient era. Of course, they weren't completely without options for leaving. Previously, the old man had said that if they drew the attention of the world of God's domain, they would be repatriated to the modern era. In other words, so long as they did something to make the world notice them, they would quickly be banished. One possibility Feng could think of was raiding the Tier 4 infant dragon themselves, without Angelica Teresa's help. Angelica Teresa was a historical figure in the modern God's domain. If the miracle of her slaying a Tier 4 infant dragon disappeared, the world of God's domain would most likely notice them. If even that didn't work, they could just cause a ruckus in the ancient era, such as killing important NPCs and affecting God's domain's history. The world would definitely notice them then. However, Feng didn't know when they could return to the ancient era again in that case. He also didn't know what kind of effects their actions would have on the world. Is that so? Xianxia and Cleansing Whistle couldn't help feeling helpless when they heard Feng's answer. If they returned to the modern God's domain, reaching Tier 4 would become many times more difficult. After all, the task of searching for their Tier 4 legacy land was incredibly challenging afterward. Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Luo shared their experiences learning their respective Tier 4 skills and spells with Xianxia and Cleansing Whistle. At the same time, the three of them also sought guidance from Feng regarding the combat methods of Tier 4 players. They were especially keen to learn how to utilize environmental mana in combat. After reaching Tier 4, they finally understood just how massive the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 classes was. Particularly, the way they controlled mana was completely different. As the first among them to reach Tier 4, Feng naturally had a better understanding in this regard. After Feng taught Lifeless Thorn's group for half an hour, Skyflare's commander, Lionheart, suddenly contacted him. In the ancient god's domain, if two players were too far away from each other, video calls between them would be impossible. At most, they could only exchange messages. The transmission of messages wasn't instantaneous either. Depending on the distance, the transmission times would also vary. In the aspect of communication, the ancient god's domain was far inferior to the modern god's domain. However, It was this inferiority that made the ancient era feel more like a real world. "Brother Blackflame, you're finally back," Lionheart said, a hearty look appearing on his face when he saw Feng. "May I know when we can meet up?" "We can meet up now. I've already dealt with the matters on my side," Feng replied, smiling. "It just so happens that I need to discuss the previous matter with you." From Lionheart's expression, Feng could tell that the crystals of souls and soul water were of significant help to the Skyflare adventurer team. Otherwise, Lionheart wouldn't have contacted him as soon as he returned. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. "You okay? Let's meet in the Skyflare Hotel. I've already prepared everything on my side," Lionheart said, smiling. "I also have a big surprise prepared for you, Brother Blackflame." "No problem. I'll head over now." Feng nodded. He then disconnected the call and turned to Lifeless Thorn and the others. "The three of you should get ready. We'll be heading to the Skyflare Hotel in a moment, and we might begin the operation right away." In response, Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Luo nodded without hesitation. They understood that they were what Feng had been waiting for all this time. Now that they had completed their promotion quests, it was indeed time to take action. As for Xianxia and Cleansing Whistle, Feng decided to let the two of them remain in Meteorite City in the hopes that they could avoid the world's detection and challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests again 20 days later. Shortly afterward, Feng's four left the Silver Hotel and made their way to the Skyflare Hotel. Chapter 2786, Foundation vs. Foundation? Meteorite City, Skyflare Hotel. Due to the arrival of Feng's group of 4, Skyflare's executives had decided to assemble in full. As a result, the conference room serving as the meeting venue seemed a bit crowded despite being the size of a basketball court. Over 100 Skyflare executives filled the conference room, every one of them at level 133 or above. Even the weakest among those present were at the Refinement Realm and Truth Realm standards. The number of peak experts exceeded 20. If Skyflare operated in the modern god's domain with such a force, it would be considered a top adventurer team that even the various superpowers would be wary of. After all, only the superpowers could match such a force. First-rate guilds wouldn't even dream of accomplishing a similar feat. In addition, among Skyflare's executives, 5 possessed incredibly strong life auras, proof that they had crossed the Tier 4 threshold already. Compared to the rumors floating around the city, Skyflare actually had one more Tier 4 player under its command. Of the 3 newly promoted Tier 4 players, one of them was the female assassin Crimson Billow. The remaining 2 were both vice commanders of Skyflare. One of them was Bloodblade, a level 135 male berserker, while the other was Faded Fern, a level 135 female oracle. "What do you think, Brother Blackflame?" Lionheart asked when he saw Feng enter the room. Pointing at the gathered Skyflare members, he chuckled and said, "These are the elites of Skyflare. Are they to your satisfaction?" "They are indeed excellent." Feng nodded in agreement as he scanned the crowd before him. Smiling, he asked, "Is this the surprise you told me about, Commander Lionheart?" Setting aside the 5 Tier 4 experts, just the 100+ Tier 3 experts present already represented astonishing combat power. Many of these Tier 3 experts sported epic items, with some even boasting fragmented legendary items. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the total number of fragmented legendary items that Skyflare had exceeded that of any individual superpower operating in the modern era. With such a well-equipped team at his command, Lionheart indeed had the qualifications to be proud. "Of course not." Lionheart smiled, shaking his head. He then took out an ancient crystal from his bag and asked, "What do you think this is?" After a casual glance at the crystal, Feng immediately revealed a look of surprise on his face. A Tier 5 sealing crystal. Feng couldn't help doubting his eyes as he took in the dark gray crystal in Lionheart's hand. Tier 5 magic scrolls were incredibly rare in God's domain because Tier 5 skills and spells possessed astonishing power. The requirement for sealing them in a magic scroll was incredibly high. Moreover, even if one successfully stored a Tier 5 skill, one would be fortunate if the resulting magic scroll could exhibit half of the skill's original power. A sealing crystal, on the other hand, could perfectly seal skills and spells at the Tier 4 standard or above. Moreover, although sealing crystals were one-time use items, they did not impose any usage requirements. Players could freely use the stored skill or spell at 100% potential. Meanwhile, the darker the color of a sealing crystal, the stronger the skill or spell stored inside. Since Lionheart's sealing crystal was dark gray, the sealed skill or spell was at the Tier 5 standard at the very minimum. That's right. This is indeed a Tier 5 sealing crystal, Lionheart said with a faint smile. We got lucky and came across a visiting high noble from another city. After helping him complete an incredibly difficult quest, we were able to purchase this Tier 5 sealing crystal from him. I believe that with this Tier 5 sealing crystal, our operation will proceed much more smoothly. Indeed. If the skill or spell sealed inside is sufficiently powerful, it might be enough to land a heavy blow on the infant dragon, Feng said, nodding. While it was true that an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon was on par with Tier 5 monsters, that was true only for the average Tier 5 monster. A Tier 4 infant dragon still couldn't stop Tier 5 skills and spells that were above average in power. Hence, this Tier 5 sealing crystal could indeed serve as a trump card in the upcoming raid. Skyflare will assist you with everything it has this time, Brother Black Flame. I have gathered all of Skyflare's top experts. We have a total of 124 people, 5 of whom are at Tier 4. We have also finished distributing the teams. For the following operation, we will all listen to your command, Brother Black Flame, Lionheart said proudly. If you have anyone you wish to include in the team, you can freely make adjustments to the team as well. I really have to thank you for this, Commander Lionheart, Feng said gratefully. While he was somewhat confident of dealing with the Tier 4 infant dragon, he had never actually killed an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon. Hence, it wouldn't be strange if their team suffered annihilation. For the Skyflare adventurer team to give him its full support for such a risky operation required a lot of courage and determination. Nonsense. We are only helping each other, Brother Black Flame. If this operation succeeds, Skyflare will also greatly benefit from it, so how can we not give it our all? Lionheart said. If there are no problems on your side, we can take action at any time. Lionheart understood that their operation this time carried great risks. However, he had decided to go through with it not because he was betting on the low odds of success but to tie Feng to his boat. Both the Crystal of Souls and Soul Water were of considerable help to players in completing their Tier 4 promotion quest. One example of this was Crimson Billow, who had failed her promotion quest before. After using a Crystal of Souls, she had completed her promotion quest on the second attempt. In fact, even Bloodblade and Faded Fern had mentioned that without the help of the Crystal of Souls and Soul Water, they would have most likely failed their promotions. Hence, Lionheart began placing even greater importance on the Crystal of Souls and Soul Water. Meanwhile, if he wished to secure a stable supply of these two items, he had to befriend Feng. As for the infant dragon raid itself, Lionheart didn't really care whether it succeeded or failed. So long as he could tie Feng to his side, he would make a profit. There's no problem on my side. However, we'll need to reorganize the composition of your team as I am going to add 3 people, Feng said. 3 people. Lionheart looked reflexively at the 3 people standing behind Feng. At this time, the 3 people behind Feng had concealed their auras and information using black cloaks. However, based on the appearances they revealed, Lionheart recognized one of them as Luo, whom he had met at the auction house previously. As for the 2 other people, they should be part of the group that entered Meteorite City with Feng. What surprised Lionheart was that Feng was actually bringing only 3 people for the operation. After all, they were going to raid an infant dragon, a creature known to be invincible against opponents of the same tier. Let alone a team of 100+ Tier 3 experts. Even an army of 10,000 Tier 3 experts might not be enough to defeat the infant dragon. Yet Feng was planning to bring only 3 people to the raid. This is my first time visiting Meteorite City, Feng said, nodding. Sorry for the poor display, Commander Lionheart. Nonsense. Since you wish to adjust the team, we naturally don't have a problem with it, Brother Black Flame, Lionheart said, shaking his head. He then invited Feng to the team and passed the team leader's authority to Feng. Afterward, Feng inspected the team's statistics and assigned Skyflare's 5 Tier 5 players to 1 squadron. As for the Tier 3 players, he divided them across 6 squadrons, with 1 squadron having 12 healers and the other 5 having none. Upon seeing Feng's team distribution, Skyflare's members were inevitably confused. If their squadrons did not possess a single healer, what would they do when they got damaged? While healers could heal players belonging to different squadrons, placing all of the team's healers in a separate squadron would definitely lower their healing efficiency. Due to positioning issues, the healers wouldn't be able to react immediately if players from other squadrons received damage. However, what Skyflare's members didn't know was that Feng had never thought about the team's Tier 3 players taking damage and losing HP. After all, if a Tier 3 player got hit by a Tier 4 infant dragon, even if it were just a scratch, the player would die without question. There was no need for a healer at all. Everyone in the healer squadron must prepare at least 20 Master Mana Recovery Potions and 20 Master Steel Potions. If you don't have enough, you can go buy them now. I'll pay for them, Feng said as he looked at the 12 Tier 3 healers. At Feng's words, everyone present gasped. A Master Mana Recovery Potion could not only instantly restore a player's mana to full but also increase a player's mana recovery speed by 150% for 3 minutes. With 20 Master Mana Recovery Potions, a healer could last through a battle involving hundreds of thousands of players. A Master Steel Potion was even more extraordinary. At this stage of the game, it was considered a divine life-saving potion. When players consumed the potion, not only would their defense increase by 300%, but their maximum HP would also increase by 1000%. Although the potion only had a 15-second duration, its cooldown was only 60 seconds. If every healer carried 20 Master Steel Potions with them, they would practically be immortal healers so long as their potion stock lasted. Oh, I almost forgot. Every healer must also carry at least 5 magic scrolls holding Tier 3 defensive curses. It would be even better if you have a Tier 4 defensive magic scroll, Feng added. Lionheart felt a little awkward when he heard Feng's words. Brother Blackflame, I don't think there are even 20 or 30 magic scrolls holding Tier 3 defensive curses. I'm afraid it'll be impossible to supply every healer with 5. Is that so? After giving the matter some thought, Feng said, if that's the case, have everyone bring at least one. Afterward, Feng spent the next half an hour reorganizing and re-outfitting the team until he was satisfied. This should be enough. Looking at the items the team members carried, Feng nodded and said, next we can start making our way over to the dragon. Okay. Lionheart revealed a bright smile when he heard Feng's words. He then turned to Wind Chaser and said, Chaser, go make the necessary preparations quickly. Understood. Wind Chaser nodded, aware of Lionheart's intentions. Their purpose in assisting Feng this time wasn't to raid the Tier 4 infant dragon but to rope him to their side, as well as show him the power of the Skyflare adventurer team. Preparations? Aren't we setting off right away? Feng asked strangely. Brother Blackflame, you might not be aware of this, but that infant dragon's location is far from Meteorite City. Even if we travel on mounts, it'll take us around 3 days to arrive, Lionheart said. Hence, for the sake of this operation, I contacted the city's high nobles a few days ago to borrow some flying mounts from them. You'll rent flying mounts? Feng was a little surprised. He never thought that Lionheart would help him to such an extent. Beak Cross/Beak B Meet/Beak, the Ghostfire Hills where the infant dragon had its lair, was indeed distant. Even the shortest route there would require them to cross nearly 30 leveling maps, including some level 140 to level 150 maps along the way. Hence, reaching the infant dragon wouldn't be an easy task. In addition, flying mounts were exceedingly rare in the ancient god's domain for some reason. They were so rare that no player in Meteorite City had gotten their hands on a flying mount even now. Hence, players who wished to travel across long distances quickly would have to rent flying mounts from the city's high nobles. However, to do so, one would first have to raise their favorability with a high noble to the level of respect. Meanwhile, in Meteorite City, the players eligible to rent a flying mount numbered no more than 10. Moreover, the rental cost was a whopping 5,000 magic crystals per day. Most importantly, players could rent flying mounts only 10 times per month at most. Hence, the city's player forces would normally choose to rent flying mounts only for urgent matters. With so many people participating in the operation this time, Skyflare would have to rent at least 7 flying mounts. In other words, Skyflare would use up 7 of its monthly rental opportunities. That's right. With the flying mounts, we'll need only half a day to reach the Ghostfire Hills, Lionheart said delightedly. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. In the entire meteorite city, he was most likely the only person who would dare make such a generous move. However, Feng shook his head in response and said calmly, "There's no need to rent flying mounts from those high nobles. You'll be wasting your rental opportunities. We can just fly there right away." "Fly there right away?" Lionheart parroted Feng's words in confusion. "Emichung." Feng nodded. Smiling, he said, "I have a flying tool so we can fly there right away. There's no need for you to trouble yourself." After saying so, Feng led Lionheart and the others to the Skyflare Hotel's rooftop. Skyflare's bewildered members followed after Feng, trying to figure out what kind of means Feng had that could fly their whole team to the Ghostfire Hills. After all, their team had over 120 people. It would take 7 flying mounts just to transport their whole team simultaneously. However, as Skyflare's executives were whispering among themselves, Feng opened the lid of a pouch hanging at his waist. The next moment, a metallic behemoth over 100 meters in length emerged from the pouch, thoroughly blocking out the sky above everyone. Chapter 2787, Unfathomable Black Flame. A flying ship? How is this possible? Skyflare's members gaped in shock as they looked at the Crimson Dragon flying ship in the sky, unable to get their minds around this scenario. "This must be an illusion," Bloodblade declared, his eyes filled with disbelief. "This must be fake. How can a flying ship appear in the hands of a player?" In an era where players didn't possess even flying mounts, a flying ship was basically an item of legends. In fact, he had only ever seen flying ships mentioned in books before. Not a single flying ship had ever appeared even in a trade city like Meteorite City. According to rumors, only the Holy City's patrol guards had flying ships, which they would use when they patrolled the human territories of God's domain. Flying ships simply weren't objects players could get their hands on. At this moment, let alone Bloodblade, even Lionheart was stunned when he saw the Crimson Dragon flying ship. As for Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser, after briefly falling into shock, they turned reflexively to look at Feng. Who is this black flame? This question continuously resounded in their minds. They had conducted plenty of investigations into Feng and his entourage. After all, they were planning a long-term partnership with him, so they had to gain some understanding of him. Only, the more they looked into Feng, the more they found him unfathomable. They simply couldn't see through his depths. Initially, they merely assumed Feng was a Tier 4 expert from another NPC city. However, after they saw the effects of the Crystal of Souls and soul water he took out, they knew that they were definitely mistaken. After all, none of the neighboring NPC cities offered such items. From then onward, they felt that Feng was someone extraordinary, potentially the executive of a major power from a distant NPC city. Otherwise, he couldn't have casually taken out such precious items. Not to mention he also possessed incredible strength as an individual. This was one of the reasons their commander, Lionheart, wished to display Skyflare's strength to Feng and rope him to their side. After all, partnering with a major power of such caliber would be of great benefit to the Skyflare adventurer team. Now Feng even brought out a legendary item like the flying ship. They simply couldn't figure out his identity. At this point, the Skyflare adventurer team practically had exclusive ownership of Meteorite City already. Although Skyflare still wasn't comparable to large guilds that occupied several cities, it could already be considered an overlord in God's domain. Even if Skyflare was still inferior to the various top guilds, the distance between them definitely wasn't that massive. When Luo saw the reactions of Skyflare's members, she wasn't particularly surprised. After all, back when Feng first revealed the Crimson Dragon flying ship in the modern God's domain, he had similarly shocked the entire world. "Alright, let's head up," Feng said before nonchalantly jumping onto the flying ship. The Crimson Dragon flying ship was an advanced flying ship capable of carrying up to 130 people, just enough to accommodate everyone present. At Feng's words, Skyflare's members promptly snapped out of their daze. They then silently boarded the Crimson Dragon flying ship while doing their best to suppress the excitement and shock in their hearts, afraid of appearing like provincials to Feng's group. Despite their best efforts, their suppressed emotions instantly exploded as soon as they arrived on the flying ship's deck. After all, the feeling of overlooking Meteorite City while standing aboard the Crimson Dragon flying ship was simply wonderful. Just the fact that the Crimson Dragon flying ship was parked in the air above Meteorite City instantly made it the most eye-catching existence in the city. At this time, players and NPCs on the streets were gazing at the flying ship, their eyes wide with shock and envy. They also held heated discussions, curious about why a flying ship would appear above the Skyflare hotel all of a sudden. The players, in particular, went into an uproar when they saw Skyflare's members aboard the flying ship. However, before Meteorite City's players could come to any conclusions, the Crimson Dragon flying ship began gradually ascending into the sky. Afterward, it transformed into a streak of light and vanished from Meteorite City, even faster than the flying mounts available for rent. How fast? At this speed we can probably reach the Ghostfire Hills in around a dozen hours, Lionheart exclaimed. He was astonished to see Meteorite City rapidly shrinking behind him. He had ridden flying mounts before. However, compared to the Crimson Dragon flying ship, those flying mounts were significantly slower. The Crimson Dragon flying ship is still all right in terms of speed, Feng said calmly. However, while it is indeed slightly faster than common flying mounts, it is still much slower than Tier 3 Advanced Extraordinary flying mounts. In terms of destructive power, though, it is comparable to Tier 4 Advanced Extraordinary flying mounts. Although Feng had spoken very calmly, Lionheart and the others paid close attention to his every word, afraid that they would miss out on even the tiniest bit of information. Brother Black Flame, you must have spent a lot of magic crystals to secure this Crimson Dragon flying ship, right? Lionheart asked after giving the matter some thought. The flying ship he was standing on was simply too cool. From Feng's description of it, it was basically a tyrant of the skies. Anyone who said they weren't interested in the Crimson Dragon flying ship would be lying. Quite a lot. Even now, my guild has only managed to produce 9. Feng said, nodding. B greater than M/B. Most of the materials the Crimson Dragon flying ship needed were relatively common. However, it was a different story for the Titan Silver and Magic Elven Stones required, especially the Magic Elven Stones. Despite having bought out all of the Magic Elven Stones on the market, Zero Wing had managed to construct only 9 Crimson Dragon flying ships until now. 9. Lionheart nearly failed to close his mouth. In his opinion, a guild would be plenty amazing to be able to procure even one of such sky tyrants. Yet Feng's guild had 9? Are you interested in the Crimson Dragon flying ship, Commander Lionheart? Feng couldn't help chuckling at Lionheart's astonished expression. I would be lying if I said I wasn't interested in such a treasure. While scanning the flying ship's deck, Lionheart said enviously, if Skyflare could have a flying ship like this, let alone occupying multiple NPC main cities, even going up against the top guilds wouldn't be a problem. The Crimson Dragon flying ship's combat power might not be a big deal for Skyflare now that the adventurer team had 5 Tier 4 players, but the flying ship's carrying capacity and speed were simply astonishing. With this flying ship, Skyflare's teams would no longer have a problem leveling up. They could travel to anywhere they wished. Skyflare could even use the flying ship to ferry resources between cities and earn a ton of magic crystals. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the existence of just one flying ship could allow Skyflare to undergo a qualitative transformation. Skyflare's executives nodded in agreement with Lionheart's words. It would be wonderful if their adventurer team could get their hands on a treasure like the Crimson Dragon flying ship. In fact, even if Skyflare gained an additional dozen or so Tier 4 players, the value these Tier 4 players could bring wouldn't even be close to what one flying ship could bring. A faint smile appeared on Feng's face as he said, Commander Lionheart, since you are so interested in the Crimson Dragon flying ship, I can sell one to the Skyflare adventurer team. The instant Feng finished speaking, every one of Skyflare's members turned to him involuntarily. Feng's words were a siren song. They couldn't help getting ensnared. Lionheart's breathing also quickened at Feng's words as he sought confirmation. Brother Black Flame, is what you said true? Of course, but it won't be cheap, Feng said, nodding. In reality, part of the reason he had taken the Crimson Dragon flying ship out was to display it to Skyflare's members and lure the adventurer team into buying it. As soon as Feng finished speaking, Lionheart answered with no hesitation whatsoever. Brother Black Flame, please state your price. So long as you are willing to sell this Crimson Dragon flying ship, Skyflare will do everything it can to buy it. Chapter 2788. Illusory Flames. While Lionheart agreed enthusiastically to Feng's offer, Yuluo looked at Feng in surprise. She never thought that Feng would actually be willing to sell the Crimson Dragon flying ship. In the modern god's domain, Zero Wing was the sole guild to own flying ships. Many superpowers wished to purchase one from Zero Wing, yet Zero Wing had rejected all offers. Of course, everyone could also understand that decision. After all, Zero Wing could reap more advantages by monopolizing the flying ship than selling it. If news got out that Feng was selling a Crimson Dragon flying ship to the Skyflare adventurer team, the various superpowers operating in the modern era would definitely die of envy. However, what Ulua wasn't aware of was that Feng had decided to sell Skyflare a flying ship because matters of the ancient era wouldn't influence the modern era. It was challenging for players of the modern era to visit the ancient era. And even if they managed to travel to the ancient era by luck, they wouldn't be able to stay for long. The number of players that could travel to the ancient era wouldn't be significant either. Likewise, the ancient era's players would have a tough time visiting the modern era. It was unlikely for the two worlds to have any major interaction with each other at this point. To put it simply, even if he sold a Crimson Dragon flying ship to the Skyflare adventurer team, Skyflare wouldn't affect Zero Wing's advantages in the modern era. Hence he could trade some precious items to Skyflare without worry. Moreover, if Skyflare grew stronger in the ancient era, the adventurer team would also have an easier time collecting the ancient era's various resources for him. After all, he had neither the time nor the strength to establish his own force in the ancient era. In that case, relying on the local powers to secure resources was the next best option. Most importantly, the fewer the people that knew of the secret between the two worlds, the better. Otherwise, be it in the ancient god's domain or modern god's domain, he shouldn't think of living a peaceful life. Commander Lionheart, if you wish to purchase the flying ship, it will cost you 10,000 Titan silver ingots, 1,000 magic elven stones, and 1,007 luminaries crystals. Feng stated his price directly. For the time being, he could already secure more than enough magic crystals through exchanging the crystals of souls and soul water. Compared to magic crystals, he prioritized obtaining materials that were rare in the modern god's domain and 7 luminaries crystals. Be rare/B. Moreover, trying to obtain these rare materials with the crystal of souls and soul water would be difficult since crystals of souls and soul water were non-essentials. After all, they merely increased players' chances of completing their Tier 4 promotion quest by a little. More precisely, the crystal of souls and soul water merely helped players complete their Tier 4 promotion quests ahead of time. In the case of players who never had a chance to complete their Tier 4 promotion quest to begin with, the items would be useless. This point was something anyone who had used the two items would know. Hence, while the various powers could accept using magic crystals, which were abundant, to exchange for crystals of souls and soul water, they would think twice if the requested currency was a strategic or rare material. After all, collecting these materials wasn't an easy task, and they were necessary for many applications. These materials basically served as the foundation of the various powers. That much. Lionheart frowned automatically when he heard Feng's price. Although he had known that the Crimson Dragon flying ship wouldn't be cheap, he never expected such a steep price. Titan silver and magic elven stone were precious resources essential to the construction of many buildings and the production of important items. As for the 7 luminaries crystal, it was something all players and powers coveted. The Skyflare adventurer team had gone to great lengths and sacrificed many experts to occupy a small area that generated 7 luminaries crystals. Moreover, Skyflare still had to station over 1,000 Tier 3 experts there to guard the area at all times. Meanwhile, the price of 1,007 luminaries crystals would basically zero out Skyflare's stockpile. Upon seeing Lionheart's reaction, Feng said unhurriedly, "Of course, this is only the first option, Commander Lionheart. You can also consider going with the second option, which is to let me invest in Skyflare and give me 5% of Skyflare's income in the future." 5%. Lionheart pondered Feng's offer carefully. Honestly speaking, 5% of the current Skyflare adventurer team's income wasn't a significant amount. However, the story would change when Skyflare grew stronger. In the long run, the income Skyflare lost would definitely far exceed the price of Feng's first offer. "Commander, my suggestion is to go with the first option," Wind Chaser whispered as he looked at Lionheart agonizing over Feng's offer. "Although we'll be broke for some time after buying the flying ship, Skyflare's value will far exceed those resources in the future." Now that Skyflare already had 5 Tier 4 players, its future was promising. Giving away part of its income for just one flying ship was unnecessary. The other Skyflare executives also looked toward Lionheart, their eyes clearly conveying agreement with Wind Chaser. Taking a deep breath, Lionheart looked at Feng and said, "Brother Black Flame, I chose the first trading option. Once this operation is over, we can conduct the transaction in Meteorite City. However, the amount of materials you need is too significant. While we have enough 7 Luminaries crystals, I can't say the same for the Titan Silver and Magic Elven stones. I don't think we can meet your demands even if we take out Meteorite City's stockpile. We can, at most, fulfill 50% of your required amount. May I know if we can make up for the remaining amount using 100 top-tier epic weapons and equipment?" This. After giving the matter some thought, Feng said, "That's fine as well, but I will accept only level 150 epic weapons and equipment. In Meteorite City, the total value of 5,000 Titan Silver ingots and 500 Magic Elven stones was equivalent to 80 top-tier epic weapons and equipment at most. Moreover, acquiring so many top-tier epic weapons and equipment wouldn't necessarily be possible. After all, while many NPC merchants in the Ancient Gods domain sold epic weapons and equipment, there was still a limit. This was especially true for top-tier epic weapons and equipment. Their rarity in the ancient era was not the slightest bit lower than in the modern era. Often, acquiring these items meant raiding mythic bosses and even superior mythic bosses. Bosses of such caliber were incredibly limited, and one would be fortunate to find even 20 of such bosses within Meteorite City's vicinity each week. Moreover, even if Skyflare now had many Tier 4 experts, raiding superior mythic bosses still carried great risks. Lionheart's offer of 100 top-tier epic weapons and equipment to make up for the difference was definitely favorable for Feng. Feng understood Lionheart's reason for doing so. In fact, if he were in Lionheart's shoes, he would go with such an option too. After all, the risks that came with giving away Skyflare's shares were massive. However, Feng didn't really mind Lionheart's choice either, since his initial goal was to obtain a large amount of Titan Silver, Magic Elven stones and 7 Luminaries crystals. The second option wasn't actually a good option for him. After all, the number of times he could enter the Ancient Gods domain was limited. 40 Wing, which was currently in dire need of resources, such a long-term investment wasn't desirable. This outcome was undoubtedly the best for Feng. Moreover, exchanging half of the required Titan Silver and Magic Elven stones into top-tier epic weapons and equipment was also a good deal for him. After all, the current Zero Wing hardly had any level 150 epic weapons and equipment. With these top-tier epic weapons and equipment, Zero Wing's executives would also have an easier time completing their Tier 4 promotion quests. "That won't be a problem." Lionheart nodded. Simultaneously, he revealed a bitter smile. For the sake of purchasing one Crimson Dragon flying ship, he had basically emptied out Skyflare's coffers. After this transaction, Skyflare would severely lack for not only magic crystals and various strategic resources but also weapons and equipment. However, despite knowing this, all of Skyflare's executives revealed ecstatic expressions on their faces. They also continuously admired and inspected the Crimson Dragon flying ship. It was as if they could already imagine the beautiful future that awaited Skyflare once they obtained the flying ship. The Crimson Dragon flying ship flew for a dozen hours or so. After passing through numerous large maps, it finally arrived at a dusky land. Despite flames burning everywhere, this land was heavily forested. As soon as everyone entered this map, they immediately felt their stamina and concentration depleting. In response, Crimson Billow drank a fire resistance potion. However, she still sensed her stamina and concentration decreasing gradually and couldn't help feeling a little surprised. Fire resistance has no effect on the flames here. At this rate, I'm afraid we'll run out of stamina and die if we stay here for more than a dozen hours. Normally, an increase in a person's fire resistance would allow them to counter all debuffs from fire. However, her increased fire resistance was actually useless here. This situation was simply unprecedented. Be greater than H/B, it seems that we'll have to move quickly. While sensing the changes in his own body, Wind Chaser said, "Otherwise, we'll probably be annihilated before we can kill that Tier 4 infant dragon." Nodding, Feng promptly commanded, "All Tier 3s will remain on the flying ship, while Tier 4s spread out and search for the infant dragon. Once you locate the infant dragon, Report back immediately. As soon as Feng finished speaking, Skyflare's 5 Tier 4 players promptly floated up, ready to start looking for the Tier 4 infant dragon. Meanwhile, Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Yuluo, who had been concealing their auras with their black cloaks all this time, also gradually rose into the air, the sight attracting the attention of Skyflare's executives. They're Tier 4s too? Crimson Billow was shocked as she looked at Lifeless Thorn's group of 3. Although Feng had already surprised her plenty of times, she still found it astonishing that the 3 players who had tagged along with Feng were also Tier 4 players. After all, Tier 4 players were still rare in the entire God's domain. On average, a main city would only have 1 or 2 Tier 4 players. Yet it was revealed that not only Feng but even the people following him were Tier 4 players. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Since when were Tier 4 players as common as cabbages? It seems Black Flame has far more secrets than we think. Fortunately, we chose to partner with him. I really don't want to imagine what would have happened had we chosen to make an enemy out of him, Wind Chaser said, smiling bitterly. Yuluo aside, Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 were part of the group that entered Meteorite City with Feng. Now that 3 out of the group of 5 were confirmed to be Tier 4 players, it wouldn't be strange that the other 2 players were hidden Tier 4s as well. To think that we were actually planning to use force if negotiations failed. In retrospect, Wind Chaser found their thoughts laughable. Subsequently, after Feng's group of 9 searched for about half an hour, Crimson Billow's voice suddenly appeared in the team chat. I found the infant dragon. It's resting inside a cave in the southwest valley. Chapter 2789 Dragons Might in a cave on the southwestern side of the Ghostfire Hills. After Crimson Billow sent the infant dragon's coordinates, Feng had quickly gathered everyone. Now all 128 members of the team were sneaking deeper into the cave. The flames seemed to be getting stronger and stronger, Yuluo said worriedly when she sensed her stamina and concentration depleting at a quicker rate. Moreover, the burning sensation is also growing stronger the deeper we go. At this rate, I'm afraid the burning sensation will grow so strong that we won't be able to focus during the battle. Indeed. The burning sensation here is getting worse. Wind Chaser nodded in agreement. Under this burning sensation, I'm afraid ordinary Refinement Realm experts won't be able to exhibit combat standards at the Refinement Realm. Previously, the illusory flames merely ate at his stamina and concentration. However, he now felt as if his whole body was scorching. Although the pain was subtle, it would still impact the performance of people with weak minds. Combat techniques, skills, and spells required precision control. Even a slight deviation could result in a massive difference in the combat power one could exhibit. After observing the environment, Lionheart suggested to Feng, Brother Black Flame, this cave is indeed extraordinary. I think our best option is to take the fight out of the cave. Otherwise, we'll have difficulty exerting our strength. I'm afraid that won't do. Shaking his head, Feng said with certainty, we must finish the infant dragon in this cave. Moreover, this is most likely our only chance. Outside this cave, we'll have trouble even touching the infant dragon. Dragons were the rulers of the sky. On paper, fighting the infant dragon outside the cave might seem to be to their team's advantage. However, doing so would actually place their team at a disadvantage. This was especially true for the team's Tier 3 players. Without the help of special skills, Tier 3 players couldn't fly by themselves. Hence, if they fought the infant dragon outside, the team's Tier 3 members would get sidelined. As for utilizing the Crimson Dragon flying ship to fight the infant dragon, that was simply a joke. Against a Tier 4 infant dragon, even an advanced flying ship wouldn't last more than 3 or 4 hits. In fact, it wouldn't be strange if the Crimson Dragon flying ship fell after just one attack. After all, the flying ship was merely capable of withstanding the attacks of ordinary Tier 4 mythic monsters. Its defenses would crumble instantly before a Tier 5 attack. Shortly afterward, Feng and the others came across Crimson Billow, hiding underneath a rock. At present, though, Crimson Billow had a wilted expression on her face. What happened? Lionheart asked strangely when he saw Crimson Billow's condition. It's nothing. Shaking her head, Crimson Billow smiled bitterly and said, I'm just wondering whether we can really win against that infant dragon. Although it is an infant dragon, our team isn't a pushover either. How would we know we can't win if we don't give it a try? Bloodblade said confidently as he looked at Crimson Billow's defeated expression. Don't forget that we have 9 Tier 4 players this time. That infant dragon is also only at Tier 4. However, after Bloodblade finished speaking, the cavern at the end of the road appeared in front of everyone. And a creature with a pale golden body over 100 meters long entered their sight. Infant Golden Dragon. Dragon Mythic. Level 140 HP 112 billion. How is this possible? Everyone gasped involuntarily when they saw the infant dragon's statistics. Even Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9, who had seen a half-step Demon King before, were astonished. The infant golden dragon's stifling aura aside, just its HP of 112 billion was already plenty mind-boggling. With 112 billion HP, the infant dragon would recover 24 billion HP every 5 seconds, or roughly 400 million HP every second. Even assuming each of their Tier 4 players could cause 50 million damage per second, after excluding the 2 Tier 4 healers, they could deal only around 350 million damage per second with the remaining 7 Tier 4 players. Moreover, this was all under the premise that the infant dragon didn't possess a powerful defense and wouldn't put up any resistance. Not to mention, the infant dragon before them was part of the Golden Dragon tribe. Its bloodline was of a much higher purity than ordinary dragons. Among the dragon race, the Golden Dragon's bloodline was second only to divine dragons. It's no wonder they say dragons are invincible among existences of the same tier. With such HP, even if we can survive this infant dragon's attacks, I doubt we can actually kill it. Wind Chaser couldn't help feeling shaken. Although HP wasn't everything, it could still provide an intuitive gauge of an existence's general strength. With how much HP the infant dragon possessed, it was easy to imagine how terrifying its basic attributes were. They were definitely at least 2 or 3 times higher than those of the average superior mythic monster of the same level. What did that mean? With an attack from a superior mythic monster of the same level, a Tier 4 player would still receive significant damage even if they merely defended themselves. However, if a Tier 4 player tried defending against one of the infant golden dragon's attacks, they would be fortunate to retain a scrap of HP to keep themselves alive. If they were unlucky, they would be one-shot. In other words, if their team wished to fight the infant golden dragon, they couldn't allow even a grace from it. Otherwise, lives would be lost. At this moment, Lionheart and the other Skyflare executives finally understood why Feng didn't assign healers to any of the Tier 3 combat squadrons. After all, Tier 3 players would be no different from ants in the upcoming battle. They were insignificant existences that would disappear upon coming into contact with even the slightest shockwave. Hence, there was naturally no need to assign healers to them. An infant golden dragon? Feng also smiled bitterly when he saw the mountain-like dragon before him. No wonder this quest was evaluated at the inferior mythic rank. This Tier 4 infant golden dragon's combat power reached the Tier 5 intermediate rank. Even Frabero in his heyday wouldn't be a match for this infant dragon. In other words, the infant dragon simply wasn't an existence Tier 4 players could hope to confront. Possibly, only Tier 4 experts wielding legendary weapons and geared in legendary equipment could hope to defeat the infant golden dragon. Otherwise, the best option for players coming across this infant dragon was to obey their instincts and flee immediately. Brother Black Flame. At this time, Lionheart couldn't help but look at Feng and shake his head. Although I don't want to say it, I'm afraid there really is no hope of killing this infant golden dragon. After seeing the infant golden dragon for himself, he finally understood that the records in books weren't entirely trustworthy. After all, the infant dragon before him was many times more terrifying than what was described in the library books he read. It simply wasn't an existence Tier 4 players could hope to fight. At the very least, it is absolutely impossible for their present selves. Most likely, only Tier 4 NPCs would have a glimmer of hope. No, that's not necessarily true, Feng said, shaking his head. A hint of determination appearing in his eyes, he continued, "We're not exactly out of options. It's just that we'll need to gamble." Killing this Tier 4 infant golden dragon was imperative. However, it wasn't just for the sake of completing his inferior mythic quest, but because he couldn't continue staying in the ancient god's domain. After all, his initial goal in visiting the Earthfall secret land was simply to acquire the necessary resources for constructing the small mobile fortress. Now that he had achieved his goal, he couldn't remain here as there were still many things he needed to attend to in the modern god's domain. Meanwhile, killing the infant dragon before him was his best chance to attract the world's attention and get the world to banish him from the ancient god's domain. Gamble. Lionheart was slightly surprised by Feng's words. He simply couldn't see how they could possibly defeat the infant dragon before them. I will start chanting an incantation in a moment, and it will most likely cause quite a commotion. So, I will need you to erect a magic barrier now to prevent the infant dragon from noticing it, Feng said, taking a deep breath. As for the subsequent battle, I will need you, Commander Lionheart, to act as support. Both you Luo and Faded Fern will be tasked with healing you. 9. You'll protect the healer squadron. As for the healer squadron, use everything you have to heal my summoned creature. Do not stop for even a moment. Summoned creature? Lionheart and the others were confused by Feng's words. They found it hard to imagine that any summoned creature could stop the infant golden dragon for even a moment. Despite their doubts, everyone still obeyed Feng's commands. The next moment, over 100 people each took out a magic array scroll from their bags and instantly erected a barrier to isolate the tunnel from the cavern. With this magic barrier present, the infant golden dragon wouldn't detect anything they did inside the barrier even if it was awake right now. Brother Black Flame, everything is ready. You can begin whenever you want. Lionheart said. Looking at the advanced magic array, he couldn't help feeling a little heartache. However, to avoid disturbing the infant golden dragon, they had no choice but to use it. Meanwhile, after Feng personally verified that everything was set up correctly, he took out the Bible of Darkness and began chanting an incantation. Originally, he had not planned to use the Bible of Darkness. After all, the cost of using it at Tier 4 was far too great. He estimated that after a few more uses, his soul would get devoured by the power of darkness. However, if he wished to slay the infant golden dragon now, he could only take the risk. Immediately after Feng began chanting, the mana inside the barrier gave off a bone-chilling sensation, the complete opposite of the burning sensation it gave off previously. Before anyone could react to the change, the barrier's interior suddenly went dark. Everyone could feel endless loneliness, coldness, and despair coming from the darkness around them. Standing in this dark environment didn't feel the slightest bit better than standing in the infant dragon's presence. As Feng continued incanting, the infant golden dragon slumbering outside the barrier suddenly opened its eyes as if startled awake. Its massive eyes then looked directly at the barrier-enveloped tunnel vigilantly. How is this possible? Faded Fern, who was hosting the magic barrier, was stunned by this development. The advanced magic array they used, Spatial Wall, could thoroughly isolate an area from the outside world. Even if a large explosion went off inside the barrier, nobody in the outside world should be able to notice it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Nonetheless, the infant dragon had clearly noticed them. What a despicable dark energy. Looking at the empty tunnel before it, the infant golden dragon bellowed, "It seems you humans have fallen as well. To think you would actually come seeking death together with a demon." The infant dragon's bellow instantly extinguished the advanced magic barrier like a storm blowing out a candle. Simultaneously, the figures of Feng and the others appeared before the infant dragon. Brother Black Flame? Seeing that the infant dragon had already stood up, Lionheart raised his shield anxiously. He then sent a sidelong glance at Feng and asked, "Are you still not done?" The power of the dragon before them far exceeded his expectations. Normally, even mythic monsters couldn't destroy the spatial wall so easily, yet the infant dragon had accomplished this feat with just one roar. He simply didn't dare imagine how powerful an actual attack from the infant dragon would be. "I'm done. I made it just in time," Feng said, a smile appearing on his pale face. As soon as Feng finished speaking, a dark void appeared in the cavern's ceiling. A stone door even larger than the infant golden dragon then fell out of this void. Before the players and infant dragon could react to this turn of events, the stone door gradually opened. Chapter 2790 Heaven-defying Battle. The demon gate inside the cavern opened. However, when the door was only partly open, a cold voice suddenly came from beyond it. Feng's group and the awakened infant golden dragon shuddered involuntarily upon hearing this voice. "A little golden lizard and a heaven-blessed individual. Wait, no, you're not an existence of this world. Interesting. How interesting. The Bible of Darkness is actually damaged? Wonderful. This is truly wonderful." The demonic words that came out of the door echoed in everyone's mind. Although the voice spoke in a calm tone, the aura escaping the door paralyzed everyone momentarily. The infant golden dragon glared at the door in fear. A Tier 5 demon king? Feng was astonished when he sensed the frightening aura from the demon gate. According to his expectations, he would already be fortunate if he could summon even a demon prince. After all, the Bible of Darkness had yet to reach its perfect state. However, the existence behind the demon gate was undoubtedly much stronger than a demon prince. In fact, none of the Tier 5 existences he had come across thus far had exuded such a powerful aura. This book isn't suitable for a little guy like you. Give it to me. Only if it is in my hands can I truly descend onto this land. At the Demon King's words, Feng suddenly sensed his control over the Bible of Darkness waning, and the Bible actually started flying toward the demon gate. Seeing this, Feng couldn't help being shocked. He never thought that a demon could resist and manipulate the Bible of Darkness's power. Hurriedly, he used all his strength to wrestle back control over the Bible of Darkness. Stop wasting your energy, little fellow. I will be taking this damaged Bible of Darkness. However, you can also rest assured. Once my clan and I thoroughly descend upon this world, I will make sure to spare you. At these words, the Bible of Darkness struggled even harder to break free from Feng's grasp. In fact, his connection with the Bible of Darkness was even severed completely, and the only thing he could do now was hold on to the book with brute force. Despicable human, you actually dared summon that thing here, the infant golden dragon bellowed. Evidently, it had figured out the identity of the existence beyond the demon gate. I will not let you succeed. Die. After letting out a roar, the infant dragon suddenly widened its mouth. Immediately afterward, a threefold magic array took shape before it. Not good. It's using dragon breath. Everyone dodge quickly. Feng shouted, surprised by the infant dragon's actions. A Tier 4 dragon breath would undoubtedly carry power at the Tier 5 intermediate rank standard. Let alone Tier 3 players, even Tier 4 players would die if they faced it. The only way they could survive this attack was to dodge it. However, the infant golden dragon was simply too fast. Before anyone could react, the threefold magic array had already taken shape. The next moment, a destructive energy ball shot out of the infant dragon's mouth, the energy ball's speed and size making it impossible for anyone to avoid in time. Everyone could only watch as the dragon breath approached them. It's over. Lionheart reflexively closed his eyes when he saw the approaching dragon breath that destroyed everything in its path. As for everyone else, they also revealed looks of despair and bitter smiles. Previously, they thought that they still stood a chance against the infant golden dragon, albeit a small chance. However, after seeing the destructive power the dragon breath carried, they realized that any form of resistance would be meaningless. The only thing they could do was wait for death. However, just when the dragon breath was about to reach Feng and the others, that cold voice came from the half-opened demon gate again. A little lizard thinks it can stop my descent? An illusory hand suddenly appeared out of thin air before Feng's team and caught the approaching energy ball. The giant hand then squeezed the energy ball, shattering it into countless dispersing particles of light. How is this possible? Everyone was thunderstruck by this scene. The dragon breath that carried such devastating power had actually been stopped so easily. They couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful the demon behind the demon gate was. However, despite this sudden turn of events, Feng's complexion did not improve. On the contrary, it even turned gloomier instead. Despite being only halfway summoned, the summoned Demon King could already exert enough strength to block a Tier 4 dragon breath casually. The Demon King's strength was definitely at the Tier 5 peak rank. This meant that the existence beyond the Demon Gate wasn't just an ordinary Tier 5 Demon King. It was a Tier 5 Great Demon King. If Feng allowed a Great Demon King to descend onto God's domain, even if it was the ancient God's domain, it would still spell disaster for the entire continent. Beat however, before Feng and the others could recover from their surprise, the infant golden dragon suddenly appeared above them. At this time, golden runes covered its body, and the aura it exuded was significantly stronger than before. It can still become stronger? When Feng looked at the infant golden dragon in the air, he was genuinely shocked for the first time in a long while. After all, the infant golden dragon was much stronger than he expected. Comparable to Tier 5 existences? What a joke. The aura and power the infant golden dragon currently displayed had already more than doubled. It was definitely much stronger than ordinary Tier 5 existences. In fact, he doubted he could survive one attack from it even if he activated his berserk skill. Despicable demon, you can't use your full strength while behind that door. I refuse to believe you can keep blocking my attacks. So long as your summoner dies, you will have to remain in that endless abyss forever. The infant golden dragon glared at the demon gate, a hint of disdain and mockery in its eyes. It then opened its mouth and launched another dragon breath. This dragon breath was much more terrifying than before. As soon as the infant dragon inhaled, Feng and the others sensed the mana within the cavern disappear completely. In addition, the Tier 3 players even had their mana rapidly sucked from their bodies. And although the Tier 4 players managed to prevent their mana from getting plundered, their ability to manipulate mana was greatly hindered. Now they couldn't even exhibit half of their usual combat power. This is that infant dragon's true strength? Bloodblade fell into despair as he looked at the massive figure in the air. Seeing it now, he couldn't help but find their previous notion of challenging the Tier 4 infant dragon laughable. The infant golden dragon was much stronger than what its HP portrayed. It simply wasn't an existence Tier 4 players could hope to challenge. This moment drove home to Feng why the quest he received was of the inferior mythic rank. He also understood why humans capable of slaying dragons were highly praised in God's domain. It would already be a miracle if a human could fight a dragon of the same tier and level to a standstill, let alone kill one. This was especially true for dragons that had reached Tier 4 or above. It wouldn't even be an exaggeration to refer to such a feat as a myth. Accompanied by a deafening roar, a dazzling energy sphere carrying devastating power descended toward the team. Little lizard, you have truly angered me now. The infant golden dragon's efforts to prevent the great demon king beyond the demon gate from descending enraged him. Suddenly, boundless power of darkness flooded out of the demon gate. A gigantic hand 5 times larger than the one before emerged from the ground. The hand was so massive that the infant dragon looked like a toy in comparison. Boom. Not only did the gigantic hand shatter the dragon breath instantly, but it even grabbed the infant dragon. And despite the infant dragon struggling desperately to break free, the giant hand remained unfazed as it smashed the infant dragon into the ground. Boom. A crater with a radius of 1,000 yards and a depth of 100 meters appeared on the cavern floor. Apart from the Tier 4 players and the Tier 3 healers, who had consumed Master Steel potions, the other players in the cavern were instantly killed by the resulting shockwave. Although Feng and the Tier 4 players remained alive, they had lost over 2/3 of their HPs. As for the surviving healers, their HPs had also fallen to a critical level. They had very nearly lost their lives. Meanwhile, after the dust in the vast cavern dissipated, the giant hand was nowhere in sight. The only thing in the crater was the infant golden dragon. Presently, however, the infant dragon had both its wings broken, with blood flowing out from all over its body. Its life aura had also weakened significantly, and its HP had even fallen to just 63%. Given the infant dragon's current state, it was evident that the great demon king's attack had heavily injured it. How strong? So, this is the strength of a Tier 5 great demon king? Feng was dumbfounded by this outcome. The infant golden dragon had put its all into the last attack, and the attack's power had definitely reached the Tier 5 advanced rank standard. Yet it still suffered a brutal beating. The difference in strength between the infant dragon and great demon king was clear for all to see. In fact, if not for the demon gate severely dampening the great demon king's strength, the infant dragon would have most likely died from that one attack. Meanwhile, after the great demon king executed this attack, his control over the Bible of Darkness had also weakened significantly. At the very least, Feng could now sense a connection between him and the Bible of Darkness. Feng hurriedly cancelled the summoning. Previously, due to the severance of his connection with the Bible of Darkness, he couldn't stop the summoning even if he wanted to. However, now that he had recovered a small portion of control over the Bible of Darkness, he could cancel the summoning. As for the cost of forcibly cancelling the summoning, he couldn't care less about it right now. After all, if he allowed a Tier 5 Great Demon King to descend onto the continent, only death awaited him. Moreover, the cost of this death wouldn't just be a loss of 1 or 2 levels. Instead, his body might very well end up a puppet of the Great Demon King, and he would have no choice but to retrain a new account. Hence he absolutely couldn't let the great Demon King exit the Demon Gate, even if doing so would leave himself in a weakened state. You damned heaven-blessed individual. I will make you pay a heavy price the next time we meet. Upon seeing the Demon Gate closing, the great Demon King bellowed angrily and repeatedly attacked the door, causing it to tremble violently. Fortunately, the Demon Gate was sufficiently powerful. No matter how much the great Demon King assailed it, the Demon Gate continued closing at a steady pace. Finally, 20 seconds later, the Demon Gate closed and disappeared from this space, leaving behind only the heavily injured infant Golden Dragon and Feng's team in the cavern. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You brother Black Flame, what should we do now? Lionheart asked in an uncertain voice after seeing the Demon Gate disappear. He didn't know whether they should flee or try to kill the infant Golden Dragon while it was heavily injured. Although the infant dragon was significantly weaker than before, it was still much stronger than superior mythic monsters of the same level. Is there even a need to ask? Looking at the infant dragon that was struggling to stand up, Feng said in a determined tone, "Now is our only chance to slay this infant dragon. With our strength we can't defeat it in its peak state. Don't tell me you're willing to miss out on such an opportunity, Commander Lionheart?" At Feng's words, Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 nodded in agreement. If the infant Golden Dragon wasn't heavily injured, killing it with their present strength was nigh impossible. Only Tier 5 players could possibly go up against it. I guess you're right. As Lionheart looked at the infant Golden Dragon, a trace of determination also appeared in his eyes. He then said, "Since that's the case, let's kill it before it recovers." After saying so, Lionheart raised his shield and led the charge against the infant Golden Dragon, with all the other Tier 4s except for Feng following close at his heels. Chapter 2791, Infant Golden Dragon's Fall. Insignificant humans. Do you think you can insult me just because I am heavily injured? When the infant Golden Dragon saw Lionheart and the other Tier 45 charging toward it, anger flared in its amber pupils, and it let loose a deafening roar. A shockwave immediately spread from the infant dragon to its surroundings. Boom, boom, boom. A series of collisions echoed throughout the cavern as Lionheart and the others got hit by the shockwave. Aside from Lionheart and Solitary 9, everyone else on the team went flying back several dozen meters, a stinging pain washing through their bodies. They also lost over 2 million HP from the attack. Lifeless Thorn and the others, who only had around 6 million HP, had basically lost 1/3 of their HPs to the shockwave. It's still so strong even after getting injured? Everyone gasped when they saw their own HP bar. The infant Golden Dragon was clearly extremely weakened right now, yet it still managed to inflict so much damage with only its roar. Its strength was simply terrifying. At this time, even Feng was stunned by this situation. In addition to its heavy injuries, the infant dragon was also suffering from the heavenly dragon's breath suppression. Otherwise, everyone would have most likely lost over half of their HP from the shockwave. Tier 3 healers, keep up. Restore the damage dealer's HP with everything you've got. Don't stop even for a moment. Feng, who was currently incapacitated due to the backlash from forcibly canceling the demon summoning, hurriedly issued commands across the distance. You Luo and Faded Fern, you two prioritize healing Lionheart and 9. Make sure their HPs are full at all times. At Feng's command, Faded Fern, a Tier 4 oracle, swung her staff and double-cast 2 Tier 3 curses. Tier 3 Defensive Curse, Contract Barrier. Tier 3 Strengthening Curse, Heavenly God's Prayer. Immediately, a translucent barrier formed around the bodies of Lionheart and Solitary 9. Simultaneously, divine runes appeared on the bodies of everyone on the team, doubling everyone's resistances and defense and increasing everyone's physique by 20% for 20 minutes. She even has a Tier 3 AoE Strengthening Curse? Feng was surprised as he looked at Faded Fern's strengthening spells were incredibly rare in God's domain. In fact, they were 10 times rarer than ordinary curses of the same tier. This was especially true for AoE strengthening spells. The value of such a spell was practically equivalent to a fragmented legendary item. In his previous life, any player who wielded strengthening spells would receive the VIP treatment from the various superpowers. This was because, unlike berserk skills, strengthening spells had short cooldowns and long durations. An AoE strengthening spell could elevate a team's combat power to a whole other level. In the past, one of the reasons Violet Cloud was recognized as one of the 10 great cleric gods was her possession of many AoE strengthening spells. This prompted the various superpowers to desperately seek her. As far as Feng knew, nobody in the modern god's domain had gained a strengthening spell even now. Yet not only did Fated Fern possess a strengthening spell, but it was even of the AoE variety. How could he not be surprised by this situation? Meanwhile, after Fated Fern cast Heavenly God's Prayer, the team's overall combat power evidently rose by a slight margin. Good. Let's continue. After seeing the barrier protecting his body, Lionheart charged forward once more. This time the infant dragon no longer attacked with its roar. Instead it swept its tail at the approaching players. However, despite seeing the tail that shattered even space itself bearing down on him, Lionheart did not back away. Instead he raised his shield and stood his ground. He then activated the Tier 3 defensive skill Blood Cloud. A crimson barrier appeared before his body, one capable of absorbing 6 attacks. Although the barrier could fully nullify only attacks at the Tier 4 standard and below, it could still diminish the damage of Tier 5 attacks. Boom. The blood cloud instantly exploded upon coming into contact with the infant dragon's tail. However, thanks to the blood cloud dampening the blow, Lionheart only stumbled 2 steps backward and lost a little over 6 million HP. For Lionheart, who had already reached level 137 and possessed 17.2 million HP, this amount of damage was still tolerable. Upon seeing that Lionheart could take on the infant dragon's attacks, everyone else on the team breathed out a sigh of relief and began assaulting the infant dragon. Bloodblade used his Tier 4 legacy skill Storm Dance. Lifeless Thorn also used his Tier 4 legacy skill Lightning Serpent. Tier 4 skills and spells bombarded the infant dragon's body one after another, every one of them dealing over 50 million damage, with some even doing over 100 million critical damage. However, compared to the infant dragon's remaining 60 billion HP, this amount of damage appeared minuscule. Is the damage still not enough? Feng frowned when he saw the result of the frenzied barrage. Apart from Lionheart, the 5 other Tier 4 players fighting were currently attacking the infant dragon with everything they had. Yet the damage they caused just barely exceeded the infant dragon's battle recovery. Moreover, this was with the infant dragon's battle recovery halved due to its heavy injuries. The Tier 3 healers healing from a distance also couldn't help growing anxious in this situation. At this rate, their team would need more than an hour to finish the battle. Meanwhile, 1 hour was definitely more than enough for the infant golden dragon to recover from its injuries. If that happened, they would be doomed. Lionheart and the others were also aware of the situation. However, this was already the best they could do. Although they could activate their berserk skills to raise their damage output temporarily, doing so would be meaningless, and would prompt the infant dragon to enter its berserk phase earlier. At that time, without their berserk skills, they would be utterly incapable of defending against the infant dragon's attacks. Do any of you have combat resurrection? Feng asked the 12 Tier 3 healers behind him. In the ancient god's domain, ordinary resurrection methods couldn't resurrect players on the spot. One special type of resurrection method could. However, the player resurrected through this method would suffer a higher death penalty. I do. 8 of the Tier 3 healers responded to Feng's question. Good. Go and resurrect the 8 players with the highest strength. Feng breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw how many responses he received. The next moment, the 8 healers with combat resurrection resurrected 8 of Skyflare's fallen members. Take these spears and divide them among yourselves. After looking at the 8 resurrected players, Feng took out the 600+ thunder spears stored in his bag. Drink a master strength potion and activate your berserk skills. Afterward, use everything you have to throw these spears at the infant dragon. It's best if you can use up all these spears before your berserk skills run out. Don't hold back. Yes, sir. The 8 players nodded, fully understanding Feng's intentions. As Tier 3 melee players, they couldn't even be considered cannon fodder in front of the Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, if they tried moving up close to the dragon, they would instantly die to any random roar. The only way they could contribute to the raid was by relying on external items. Only then would they have a chance of dealing damage to the infant dragon. The 8 players consumed the master strength potions they had prepared beforehand, which increased their strength attribute by 70% for 3 minutes. They then activated their respective berserk skills, further improving their basic attributes. In terms of strength, the 8 of them could already rival mythic monsters of the same level. After seeing the infant dragon swing its tail, exposing its back, Feng ordered, "Attack. Aim at the dragon's injuries or the reverse scale on its back." At Feng's command, the 8 melee players promptly threw the thunder spears they held with all their might. Boosh, boosh, boosh. The next moment, 8 lightning arcs cut through space and landed on the infant dragon's injuries and reverse scale. Roar. The infant dragon roared in pain at the attacks. Simultaneously, damages exceeding 50 million appeared above its head one after another. There was even one critical hit that dealt over 130 million damage. The 8 melee players' attacks were not the slightest bit weaker than those of Lifeless Thorn and the other Tier 4 combatants. Only the frequency of their attacks was slightly inferior. Good. Next volley. Seeing that the attacks were highly effective, Feng promptly called for another attack. In response, the 8 melee players each took out another thunder spear and hurled the weapons at the infant dragon. When the attacks connected, the infant dragon's HP bar finally shrank, albeit slightly. As expected of the commander. We have a chance now. Solitary 9 couldn't help growing excited when he saw the rate of the infant dragon's HP decrease accelerating. Crimson Billow, who was frantically attacking the infant dragon, looked toward Feng in surprise despite herself. He still has a trump card. She never thought that Feng could actually add 8 more Tier 4 combatants to the fight. Now with their damage output, killing the infant dragon within a short period was entirely possible. The infant golden dragon's HP continuously decreased over time. 60%, 40%, 30%. The speed at which the infant dragon lost HP was nothing like before. Only in exchange for this boost in DPS, the supply of thunder spears declined rapidly. In just 2 minutes, the 8 Tier 3 players had already used up more than 400 thunder spears. Everyone be careful. It's going berserk. Feng warned when he saw that the infant dragon's HP bar had fallen to a critical level. As soon as Feng finished speaking, the infant dragon suddenly let out an angry roar. Simultaneously, the dragon's body gave off a dazzling golden glow, and its eyes turned bloodshot. It had evidently entered a berserk state. Alright. Since Brother Black Flame has let us see his cards, let's show him ours as well. Glancing at Faded Fern, Lionheart shouted, "Fern, it's your turn now. Leave it to me." Faded Fern smiled. She then took out the Tier 5 sealing crystal from her bag and began chanting an incantation. Immediately, as if time had frozen, silence fell over the entire cavern. The only exception to this phenomenon was the gradually shattering crystal in Faded Fern's hand. Before the infant golden dragon could smash its claw at Lionheart, a magic spear several hundred meters long suddenly appeared above the infant dragon and struck its head. Tier 5 spell Destruction Spear. Boom. The infant dragon's titanic body instantly collapsed to the ground, the impact creating a crater several dozen meters deep. The space surrounding the crater even turned into a dark void. The next moment, a damage value exceeding 10 billion appeared above the infant dragon's head. In addition, not only did the infant dragon's berserk state get interrupted, but the infant dragon was even powerless to push itself off the ground. The power of the destruction spear stupefied everyone present. Even Feng never thought that the sealing crystal would hold such a powerful spell. The destruction spear was just slightly inferior to the Great Demon King's attack from before. Good. Everyone attack with everything you've got. Feng shouted. Ignoring the fact that he was still in a weakened state, he activated Power of Darkness, which allowed him to move his body. He then charged straight at the incapacitated infant dragon. As for everyone else, they too activated their berserk skills at Feng's command, instantly doubling their basic attributes. Damages exceeding 100 million appeared above the infant dragon's head one after another. 10%, 6%, 3%. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Just as the infant dragon was about to recover from its incapacitated state, Feng activated Divine Providence before using his strongest trump card. Tier 3 skill Blade Awakening. Tier 4 skill Lightning Edge. The next moment, Feng, who had entered a transcendent state, brandished the abyssal blade. A river of light then descended upon the infant golden dragon's body. -135,474,514. -129,435,471. -264,854,214. A series of damages exceeding 100 million appeared above the infant golden dragon's head in rapid succession, the attack thoroughly plundering its remaining HP. Chapter 2792, Astonishing Harvest. The infant golden dragon uttered a mournful cry as its titanic body crashed to the ground. Subsequently, an unprecedented silence descended on the cavern. We did it. We succeeded. Everyone heaved a deep sigh of relief when they looked at the infant dragon's corpse lying on the ground. Simultaneously, an indescribable sense of joy and excitement also appeared on their faces. After all, they had just created a miracle, a full dragon-slaying battle. Even if their opponent was merely a Tier 4 infant dragon, they had still slain a real dragon. The next moment, before the survivors of the team could recover from their joy, brilliant flashes suddenly enveloped their bodies as their experience bars filled up rapidly. The amount of EXP the infant golden dragon awarded was leagues above the EXP from ordinary mythic bosses. Even Feng leveled up 3 times consecutively, reaching 32% of level 140. As for everyone else, they gained even more levels from the raid, with Lionheart reaching level 141 and Luo reaching level 139. Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 even went from level 127 to level 138. The amount of EXP everyone received stupefied them. Nobody thought that killing a level 140 infant dragon would grant so much EXP. Of those present, only Feng and Lionheart did not place much concern on their levels. After all, as veteran Tier 4 players, they knew very clearly how easy it was for Tier 4 players to gain levels. In fact, they could most likely attain level 150 in 10 days, reaching the minimum requirement to challenge their Tier 5 promotion. However, players would not necessarily be able to get promoted to Tier 5 just by meeting the level requirement. After all, players would have to create a powerful mana body of their own. Compared to the levels he gained, Feng was much more concerned about the infant golden dragon's loot. The infant golden dragon they had killed was a dragon in the truest sense, not one that the main god system had weakened drastically. This point was clear just from the EXP the infant golden dragon awarded. Compared to the magic dragon clan that Feng had killed some time back, the infant golden dragon was like an entirely different creature. Some time after the infant golden dragon died, sacred light descended from the cavern ceiling, illuminating the entire cavern. Simultaneously, melodious hymns also echoed in everyone's mind. It seems divine providence did its job. Feng sighed in relief when he saw the sacred light shining down from the ceiling. Although divine providence increased his luck attribute significantly, the hidden attributes effects would be diminished when dealing with monsters at the superior mythic standard or above. And while the infant golden dragon was considered only a mythic monster, it was still part of the dragon race. It was far stronger than ordinary superior mythic monsters of the same level. Hence, the fact that he managed to trigger a divine hymn was truly a stroke of luck. Of course, part of the reason he managed to trigger a divine hymn was most likely this being the first kill of a real dragon in the ancient god's domain. Meanwhile, as the divine hymn descended, a system notification also entered everyone's ears. System, congratulations. You have killed a Tier 4 infant golden dragon. You have obtained the Dragon Slayer title, World Reputation plus 101 Gold Legacy Treasure Chest. Crap. There's such a benefit as well? Bloodblade was astonished when he saw the system notification. Initially he thought that they would be working for Feng for free. He never imagined that slaying the infant dragon would earn them such astonishing rewards too. At this time, even Lionheart was surprised by this situation. After all, the rewards were simply too lucrative. Firstly, the Dragon Slayer title would allow them to enjoy the status of a high noble in the various cities of God's domain. In fact, their authority would be even greater than the typical high nobles, close to reaching that of a city lord. Not to mention, with the Dragon Slayer title equipped, their basic attributes and physique would increase by 20% when dealing with dragon-type monsters in the future. As for the awarded Gold Legacy Treasure Chest, it was something all Tier 4 players would dream of obtaining. The Gold Legacy Treasure Chest had a considerable chance of awarding a legacy book, which would grant the user with a significant number of legacy skill points when used. The treasure chest also had a high chance of containing rare Tier 4 skill and spell books, as well as a small chance of containing a legacy guidance for the road beyond Tier 4. These rewards were far more valuable than weapons, equipment, and magic crystals. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the gold legacy treasure chest's value was equivalent to a fragmented legendary items. For some people, the treasure chest was even better than a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, aside from the reward notification, Feng, Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Yulua received a second system notification. System warning. The world of God's domain has noticed your existence as an outsider. You will be expelled from the world in one natural day. Sure enough, it was a success. Feng revealed a faint smile upon seeing the system warning. If killing the infant golden dragon and altering a small portion of God's domain's history could not get him out of the ancient God's domain, he would really have a headache. After all, he had already achieved his original goal in coming here, and he still had many matters he needed to deal with in the modern God's domain. He simply couldn't afford to waste time here. As for the matter of earning various resources here, that was supposed to be a long-running project. Moreover, the amount of resources he could obtain depended entirely on the Skyflare adventurer team's strength and resources. Meanwhile, Skyflare's development couldn't be accomplished overnight. This is great. I can finally go home. As for Yulua, she too grew joyful when she saw the system warning. In fact, she felt even happier at seeing this system warning than when she received the gold legacy treasure chest. While everyone rejoiced over the gold legacy treasure chest they received, over 100 items appeared in midair and began descending to the ground. The sight of the infant golden dragon's loot made everyone present momentarily forget about the legacy treasure chest. Boid/B. The aura of items can actually reach such an intensity? Crimson Billow was astonished as she studied the items that were gradually piling up on the ground. Just what kind of items dropped? Could there be a legendary item? This question plagued everyone's mind. The reason for everyone's reaction was the aura that the infant dragon's loot radiated, which practically rivaled that of superior mythic monsters. Even ordinary Tier 3 players would have to expend a lot of effort just to approach the loot. At this time, only Feng managed to remain relatively calm. This was because he had heard of other people slaying dragons before. Only the dragons that the God-ranked expert teams killed back then weren't Tier 4 infant dragons but adult dragons at the peak of Tier 5. According to what he had heard, the sight of those dragons' loot was truly a spectacle to behold. Just the visual phenomenon the loot created had covered a radius of over 10,000 yards. The combined aura the items radiated had also been so powerful that even Tier 4 players couldn't approach the loot. Only Tier 5 players and above could do so. In comparison, the visual phenomenon created by the infant golden dragon's loot only covered a radius of several hundred yards. The aura the loot radiated was so weak that even Tier 3 peak experts could approach it if they gritted their teeth. Hence, Feng didn't find this outcome particularly surprising. However, the infant golden dragon's loot and Tier 5 adult dragon's loot wouldn't actually have a significant difference in quality. What difference in quality there was would only be akin to the difference between an epic item and a fragmented legendary item. It wouldn't be as significant as the difference between a fragmented legendary item and a legendary item. After all, both kills were dragons. One side was just slightly stronger. Moreover, as Tier 6 God-ranked experts were responsible for killing the adult dragons, the loot quality was reduced. In comparison, their team had defeated a Tier 4 infant dragon without a single Tier 5 player on the team. If one were to talk about raid difficulty, their team faced a much greater difficulty than the Tier 6 God-ranked expert teams. I wonder if it dropped a complete Saint guidance? If one did drop, I might be able to improve my mana body further. Feng prayed inwardly as he looked at the items slowly piling up on the ground. At this time, compared to materials, weapons, and equipment, what he hoped to obtain more was a legacy guidance. This was typical of Tier 4 experts. After all, even with multiple fragmented legendary items, a Tier 4 expert wouldn't be able to go up against Tier 5 existences. As for the possibility of the infant golden dragon dropping a legendary item, that was utterly impossible. As far as Feng knew, players couldn't obtain legendary items through killing monsters. It didn't matter even if the monster in question was a dragon. At best, monsters would only drop fragmented legendary items that could be repaired into legendary items. Thus, Every legendary item was incredibly precious, and a Tier 5 expert would be fortunate to obtain even one. After another dozen seconds or so passed, all of the items finally landed on the ground. Feng immediately approached the mountain of loot and began sorting through it. The spectating Skyflare members couldn't help drooling, wishing they could help Feng with the loot. Guild leader Black Flame has really hit the jackpot this time. I wonder if a legendary item dropped? If he gets a legendary item, his combat power would most likely skyrocket and approach the Tier 5 standard. Wind Chaser sighed as he enviously watched Feng collect the loot. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He finally understood how big a gap divided Tier 4 and Tier 5 existences. It was even larger than the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 existences. Ordinary weapons and equipment couldn't make up for this gap. Only the rumored legendary weapons and equipment might work. If Feng could get himself a legendary weapon now, he would truly become an invincible existence. After all, no Tier 4 player could go up against Tier 5 existences yet. Meanwhile, after working non-stop for 10 minutes, Feng finally finished sorting through the loot. Once he organized the loot, he had to press his hand against his chest to suppress the excitement in his heart. The loot drop this time was simply too amazing. It was definitely the most amazing loot he had ever seen. This included even the loot he had seen in his previous life. Setting all else aside, just the golden longsword sitting in his bag had very nearly made him faint from happiness. This weapon was one of God's domain's 10 great legendary weapons as well as one of God's domain's 36 famed swords. It was also the prototype of the weapon Voidbreaker and could cut all existences. Its name was the Light of Two Worlds, also known as the World-Breaking Gold. Chapter 2793, World Authority. The golden longsword covered in crimson divine runes sitting inside his bag was definitely the dream weapon of all swordsmen. So that's why the Light of Two Worlds was rumored to have been destroyed and no longer existed in God's domain in the past. Feng couldn't help his elation as he inspected the longsword in his bag. As it turns out, the weapon can't be obtained in the modern God's domain but only in the ancient God's domain. Light of Two Worlds. One-handed sword, fragmented legendary rank, equipment requirement, strength 6000, tier attack power, 270% of strength, attack speed 3% of agility, all attributes increases according to the user's level. When equipped, attacks gain the mana annihilation effect, causing a spatial collapse in an area of 4 by 100 yards. Attacks have a 50% chance to deal 300% damage. Strength increased by 70%. Agility increased by 60%. Intelligence increased by 30%. Endurance increased by 60%. Attack speed increased by 40%. Ignore levels plus 50. All sword type skills effect increased by 40%. All sword type skills plus 1 level. Effective mana increased by 50%. Additional skill 1 spatial slash, tier 4/1 attack. Increases strength by 200%, power by 2 ranks, up to tier 5 advanced rank at maximum, and attack range to 1000 yards. Cooldown, 40 seconds. Additional skill 2 golden soul. Tier 4 improves perception of magic elements by 200% and mana control by 300%. Reduces all concentration consumption by 70%. Duration, 1 minute. Cooldown, 6 hours. Additional skill 3 World Breaker. Tier 4 consumes half of the user's concentration and mana to enhance the Light of Two Worlds, granting the weapon the power to break worlds for 1 attack. Forcibly increases the power of attack by 1 tier, up to tier 5 advanced rank at maximum. Cooldown, 1 hour. Created by the ancient god of light. The Light of Two Worlds possesses the power to cut all things. The divine power sources within the weapon have been destroyed by an inexplicable power. However, as the weapon itself is still intact, it is possible to fully repair it by injecting new divine power sources. Divine power source injected 0/2. Despite being the prototype of the Voidbreaker, the Light of Two Worlds had still managed to rank number 1 among God's domain's 36 famed swords. One could easily imagine how powerful the weapon was. Although the Light of Two Worlds was currently incomplete, just the basic attributes it provided already made it far superior to even the Abyssal Blade. It undoubtedly had the highest attack power out of all the one-handed swords Feng had ever seen. Not to mention there were also the outrageous skills the weapon carried. Just by wielding the Light of Two Worlds, a tier 4 swordsman would be capable of exchanging one move with a tier 5 existence. This was a feat that was impossible with ordinary fragmented legendary weapons. However, while the Light of Two Worlds was incredibly powerful, its usage condition was also astonishingly high. Without the several fragmented legendary items on Feng, he wouldn't be able to equip the weapon. Meanwhile, the Light of Two Worlds' appearance could also be considered heaven-sent. Now that Feng had reached level 140, both the Twilight Blade and Killing Ray could no longer keep up with his level. Hence, he had mainly been fighting with only the Abyssal Blade all this time, with the Twilight Blade and Killing Ray as support. However, now that he had the Light of Two Worlds, he could arm both his main and sub-arms with adequate weapons. In fact, even if he failed to collect the 2 remaining fragments of Solomon's sword, he wouldn't have to worry about finding a replacement weapon. Moreover, even if he did manage to complete Solomon's sword, the complete Light of Two Worlds wouldn't be the slightest bit inferior to it. The only problem was that divine power sources were incredibly hard to find. In fact, Feng had only ever heard rumors of divine power sources. He had never actually seen one before. This was because divine power sources were far more valuable than god crystals. They were the power sources of gods, and they carried incredible strength. The value of a divine power source was comparable to a legendary item. Meanwhile, the Light of Two Worlds actually required 2 divine power sources. It seems I'll need to have the guild investigate divine power sources. Looking at the Light of Two Worlds, Feng inwardly resolved to repair the weapon no matter the cost. Legendary weapons were far too rare in God's domain. Now that one had appeared before him, it would be a huge waste if he did not try to repair it. Meanwhile, after seeing Feng had finished sorting through the loot, Lifeless Thorn and the others approached him with curious eyes. "Commander, did anything good drop this time?" Looking at Feng, Solitary 9 asked in a whisper, "Did a legendary item really drop?" They had just defeated an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon. If Feng said nothing good dropped, nobody would believe him. Solitary 9 was very curious to find out just how excellent the infant golden dragon's loot was. After all, there was still no news of any player obtaining a legendary item, so nobody could tell how powerful legendary items were. If a legendary item had truly appeared among the items dropped, they would have hit a huge jackpot. "Aren't you guys taking legendary items too lightly? There's no way a legendary item can drop from a monster." Feng smiled and shook his head when he saw the excited expressions of Solitary 9 and the others. He then said vaguely, "However, while there is no legendary item in the loot, there are several items whose value is comparable to legendary items. To me, at least, these items are almost as valuable as actual legendary items." He had no intention of telling everyone the specifics of the items dropped this time. This was because the loot was truly astonishing. Aside from the Light of Two Worlds, there were 2 other items that could easily cause a sensation among God's domain's various powers. One of the 2 was a magic array design. Although the design only recorded a master magic array, this master magic array was more valuable than even some grandmaster magic arrays. This was because this magic array existed only in the ancient God's domain, the 12-array magic world. This magic array could increase the density of all mana within its area of influence by 200% and players' mana perception by 100%. Although it only had 2 specific functions, if brought back to the modern God's domain, it would definitely stand at the peak among all magic arrays in existence. As for the second item, it was a mysterious flame. Be it in the ancient God's domain or modern God's domain, mysterious flames were incredibly rare items, especially Tier 3 mysterious flames and above. A Tier 3 mysterious flame was just as rare as a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, the mysterious flame the infant golden dragon dropped was the Tier 4 mysterious flame Hellfire. A Tier 4 mysterious flame was something Feng had only ever heard about in God's domain. According to rumor, after reaching Tier 4, mysterious flames would all possess astonishing power and a variety of incredible effects. Take the Soul Fire, for example. It was a mysterious flame capable of annihilating a player's soul, leaving the said player with no choice but to delete their accounts and restart from scratch. Such a feat was impossible for most Tier 5 existences. Moreover, even if a Tier 5 existence had the ability to wipe out a player's soul, it would only work on low-tier players. As players reached higher tiers, their souls would also grow stronger and become more resistant to destruction. After a certain point, even a Tier 6 god wielding the power to annihilate the immortal souls of players wouldn't be able to force the said player to delete their account. Nevertheless, the Tier 4 Soul Fire could easily annihilate even the souls of Tier 3 players. Only after reaching Tier 4 would players become somewhat resistant to the Soul Fire's strength. This was also why the corrosive effect of the mysterious NPC's soul chain had weakened considerably after Feng had reached Tier 4, allowing Feng to live for much longer. Now he had obtained a complete Tier 4 mysterious flame. It was different from the incomplete soul fire that he had gained through the mysterious NPC's soul beast. The other dropped items were similarly very precious. Out of the 100+ items dropped, over 30 were legendary materials such as dragon claws, dragon teeth, dragon scales and dragon blood. There were also over a dozen master recipes and epic equipment forging designs. The rest were mainly inferior legendary materials and level 150 epic weapons and equipment. Two materials stood out among all that bounty, both inferior divine artifact ranked materials: the dragon eye and the dragon crystal. These were the quest items Angelica Teresa needed. Meanwhile, after hearing Feng's words, Lifeless Thorn and Solitary Nine stopped asking questions. They understood that the items dropped this time were extraordinary and could not be revealed. Moreover, Feng had already answered the main question plaguing their minds. There was no legendary item among the dropped items. You guys start resurrecting the others. We'll return to Meteorite City afterward, Feng said to the team's healers as he looked at the dead Skyflare members' corpses scattered around the cavern. Once everyone was alive again, Feng opened a spatial gate in the direction of Meteorite City. Thanks to the spatial gate, the return trip, which should have originally taken a dozen hours or so by flying ship, only took 4 hours, astonishing Skyflare's members. If not for the spatial gate's long cooldown and short duration, it would have definitely been considered a godly skill in God's domain. After returning to Meteorite City, Feng completed all his transactions with Lionheart. Aside from the Crimson Dragon flying ship, Lionheart also purchased an additional 20 crystals of souls and 100 drops of soul water, which netted Feng an additional 6 million magic crystals. Lionheart also used 3 million pieces of mana ore, which was treated as equivalent to 750,000 magic crystals, to exchange for another 5 crystals of souls. Although the mana ore's price had been slightly inflated, this was unavoidable as purchasing mana ore in bulk was incredibly difficult. Purchasing too many would naturally raise the ore's market value. However, for Feng, getting 3 million pieces of mana ore for the price of just 750,000 magic crystals was already a bargain. After the transactions with Lionheart, Feng passed 30 crystals of souls and 1,000 drops of soul water to Xianxia for her to conduct future transactions with the Skyflare adventurer team. At the same time, he also tasked her with secretly purchasing some of God's domain's rare items. Finally, after settling all his business affairs, Feng handed the dragon eye and the dragon crystal to Angelica Teresa, who was still recuperating from her injuries. As soon as he handed over these 2 items, not only did Angelica's favorability of him increase by 100 points, but she also gave him a Tier 5 legacy guidance she had obtained from a sword saint. Feng was a little surprised by this reward. Is this the hidden reward for not bringing Angelica Teresa on the raid? While the infant golden dragon had indeed dropped a lot of excellent items, it hadn't dropped any legacy items. This situation had rendered Feng quite speechless at the time. Now, Angelica Teresa directly handed him the legacy guidance he wished for dearly. After the conversation with Angelica, Feng immediately received a system notification. System: congratulations. You have completed the inferior mythical quest World's Choice. You have gained World Authority +2. System: you have obtained World Authority. World Authority currently at level 1. Please feel the specific effects of World Authority on your own. As soon as the system notification appeared, an indistinct chain became visible around Feng's body from the void. A moment later, this chain suddenly disintegrated, and he immediately felt the world around him becoming much clearer than before. He could even sense that his intimacy with the world of the ancient god's domain had improved slightly. The world was no longer as hostile toward him as before. So, these are the effects of World Authority? Feng was astonished when he sensed the changes to his body. His affinity with the magic elements was at least 50% better than before. His perception of his mana's operating principle had also improved significantly. After careful observation, he noticed that the layer of white mist that hindered his perception had thinned out by roughly 30%. With such a tremendous improvement, his chances of constructing a Tier 5 mana body would increase by at least 20%, at least 10 times more than what a legendary item could provide. Meteorite City, Silver Hotel. After spending half a day experiencing the benefits of having world authority, Feng decided to take a break. I've already made major strides in my mana control in merely half a day of experimenting. At this rate, my control over mana can probably reach the Advanced Master Standard in just half a month. Feng looked at the time in astonishment. Initially, he had estimated that he would take 3 or 4 months to reach the Advanced Master Standard for mana control. Now he would need only half a month to accomplish this feat. The amount of time he could save with world authority was astonishing. After reaching Tier 4, what was most important to players would no longer be weapons and equipment but their control over mana. The stronger a Tier 4 player's mana control was, the easier using skills and spells would be. They would also have an easier time constructing their Tier 5 mana body. From what he knew, one's mana control needed to be at the Advanced Master Standard at the very minimum to construct a Tier 5 mana body. In other words, so long as his mana control reached the Advanced Master Standard, he could begin attempting to construct a new mana body. "Commander, it's almost time," Lifeless Thorn said as he entered the room. "Hey, I've finished all my business here already. We can go now." Feng nodded. Afterward, Feng, Lifeless Thorn, and Solitary 9 went in secret to a forest several thousand yards away from Meteorite City and met up with Luo, who had been waiting there for quite some time now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Guild Leader Black Flame, will we really be able to return? Luo couldn't help asking as she counted down the time. She had tried all sorts of methods to leave the ancient god's domain, yet none of them had succeeded. Although there was the system notifications assurance this time, she still felt a little doubtful. "Relax. The system won't lie to us," Feng said, chuckling when he saw the anxious look